Hi guys. Tonight we travel back almost 1,000 years to a world of flickering torches, clanking armor, and the soft thud of hooves on muddy ground. You stand at the edge of a dark forest, where mist curls around a lonely wooden tower perched on an earthen mound. It isn't a fairy tale castle, yet more, a rough dream of one, but it's here that the idea of the medieval castle begins to take shape. You can almost hear the crackle of fires, the calls of watchmen, and the creak of wooden gates. The night smells of wet earth, smoke, and fear. And honestly, if you were a peasant wandering too close, you probably wouldn't survive this place. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, let your breath slow, and we'll drift into the story of when people first began to build medieval castles. You stand in a Europe still shivering from the collapse of the Roman Empire. Centuries of chaos have left cities crumbling and roads overgrown. In their place, local warlords carve out tiny pockets of power. You can almost picture them, rough-handed men wrapped in furs, clutching swords more precious than gold, ruling from timber halls that smell of smoke and damp straw. Safety is a fragile dream, and every valley hides another rival. Out of that fear grows something new, the impulse to build not just homes, but fortresses. The first castles are barely castles at all. They're called mottes and baileys, a mound of earth, the motte, crowned with a wooden tower, overlooking a fenced courtyard, the bailey, where people and animals huddle during raids. You trudge up that muddy slope, your boots sinking into the soil packed by hundreds of desperate hands. Inside the palisade, the air smells of livestock, sweat, and the faint sweetness of pitch used to waterproof the wood. Nothing feels permanent here. One spark and the whole place could go up in flames. Yet in a landscape of chaos, even this fragile structure feels like hope. It's around the 10th century, in the heart of what is now France, that these primitive fortifications begin to multiply. Local lords, too small to rely on kings for protection, start claiming authority by the strength of their towers. Historians still debate whether these early fortifications spread because of Viking raids or internal feudal squabbles, but either way, the effect is the same. Europe bristles with mounds and fences. A new kind of architecture and a new kind of society are being born together. By candlelight, you imagine those first lords discussing their plans. No blueprints, no drafts, just rough gestures and the intuition of survival. Build higher, one might grunt. Make the ditch deeper. And so men dig, hauling earth in baskets, piling it into cones of power. The motte becomes the visible heartbeat of authority, something that says, "Here I rule." One mainstream historical fact anchors us here. The earliest known Motte-and-Bailey castle still stands, or rather its mound does, at places like Château de Douai-la-Fontaine in France, dating to around the 952. But those early castles are not built by kings, they're built by men who can't wait for permission. Power, at this point, is local, personal, and often violent. The quirky truth is that some early castle builders didn't even own the land they fortified. In a strange, almost medieval version of squatting, a lord might throw up a tower overnight and dare anyone to stop him. Sometimes, no one did. That's how feudal Europe took shape, one unauthorized fort at a time. You imagine yourself standing on the motte, watching fires flicker in the villages below. You can hear distant dogs barking, the soft clink of armor as sentries change guard. The air bites cold against your cheeks, and the wood beneath your boots creaks softly. Inside the keep, there's little comfort, just a smoky hearth, straw bedding, and perhaps a chest of coins or weapons. Yet for the people below, that tower represents protection, however flawed. A century or so later, this crude design will evolve into something breathtakingly durable. The wooden walls will be replaced by stone, and the bailey will grow into a sprawling complex of towers, halls, and courtyards. But that transformation begins with these rough experiments human fear distilled into architecture. Historians still argue whether to call these early sites castles at all. Are they merely forts? Or does the very idea of a castle require a sense of residence and prestige? The lines blur. You walk between definitions like fog on the moor, each step revealing a little more, but never the full picture. You feel time slow as we linger in that twilight of invention. Monks in nearby monasteries grumble about these new, private strongholds, calling them nests of sin and rebellion. Kings worry, rightly, that every lord with a tower becomes harder to control. But peasants? They whisper prayers of thanks when raiders pass by, and the local motte gives them refuge. Safety and oppression look surprisingly similar when viewed from below. A blacksmith's hammer rings in the bailey. Sparks burst into the dim air. Children chase chickens between rough huts. And you, hovering there in imagination, can almost taste the soup thickened with barley and fear. Somewhere beyond the wooden palisade, wolves howl. They are real wolves, of course, but also symbolic ones. Hunger, invasion, betrayal. The medieval world is haunted by these. So people build. They pile earth into hope and carve identity from timber. A curious detail. Some early keeps were daubed with lime to make them look like stone. Vanity, you might think, but also psychology. A whitewashed tower glowed in moonlight like a beacon of power. And perhaps, when raiders approached, that illusion of permanence was enough to make them turn away. As night deepens, your imagination drifts over hundreds of mottes scattered across Europe, each a flickering ember of ambition. The map of the continent becomes a constellation of fears and dreams, all glowing faintly in the dark. You start to feel the rhythm of medieval life, the cycles of harvest and hunger, the ceaseless building and rebuilding after raids. Castles are born not from grandeur, but from exhaustion, the human desire to rest somewhere safe, even for a night. And yet, these wooden towers are only the beginning. Within a few generations, the earth will shake with the sound of chisels and hammers, and castles will rise not from mud, but from the bones of mountains themselves. You might smile faintly at the thought how even fear can inspire beauty. The mist thickens. You step back from the motte, the scent of wood smoke curling around you, and hear distant thunder. Change is coming. Stone will soon replace wood, and with it, the very idea of power will harden. The Middle Ages are about to become monumental. For now, though, you rest your hand on rough timber and feel the pulse of history beating beneath your fingers. The first true castles haven't yet appeared, but the world is dreaming of them. You wake before dawn, mist hugging the fields, and somewhere ahead you see another mound rising from the wet grass. This one is higher, its wooden tower thicker, its ditch filled with dark water. The Motte-and-Bailey idea has spread like wildfire across Europe. Every ambitious lord wants one, and you can feel why. It is not just protection, it is presence. A statement carved into the land that says, "I'm here, and I matter." The earth itself becomes an instrument of power. You watch peasants with spades and oxen drag soil into towering heaps. Mud squelches under their feet, sweat drips from their foreheads, and the rhythmic scrape of shovels fills the air. They do not call it architecture yet. They call it survival. Each mound is a promise that raids will not end in ruin next time. By the 11th century, this pattern dominates the landscape. Simple fortifications turn into networks of control. From above, the countryside looks like a constellation of raised mounds and fenced courtyards, each one watching the next. A chain of vigilance stretches across regions once lawless. Historians agree this period marks the true beginning of feudal Europe. Local warlords stop being nameless raiders and become lords of the manor. You climb a motte yourself in imagination, boots sinking into the clay packed by generations. The wind up here smells faintly of wood smoke and sheep dung. Below you, the bailey hums with life. Chickens scuttle, children chase each other, blacksmiths hammer, and dogs bark. You can almost taste the smoke and hear the splash of buckets drawn from a well. In this small, fenced world, every sound is contained, every life accounted for. A mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. Between 1060, 6 and 1100, over 500 Motte-and-Bailey castles were built in England alone. The Norman invasion did not just change rulers, it changed landscapes. But the idea had already matured in France, where centuries of petty warfare had made fortifications second nature. What the Normans brought to England was not invention but efficiency. A curious and rather charming tidbit. Some of these early castles had small gardens inside their baileys. Amid the mud and fear, lords' wives planted herbs and vegetables, both practical and symbolic. Mint for medicine, sage for cooking, and violets for beauty. It is strange to think of petals growing beside sharpened stakes, but that is how medieval life worked. Beauty and brutality coexisting in the same square yard. As you wander, you notice how the bailey feels like a small village. There are workshops, stables, and a chapel made of rough timber. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. Everything smells of wood, hay, and unwashed wool. The castle is not only a fortress, it is a living machine, constantly busy. Historians still argue whether these early mottes were built primarily as defensive structures or as symbols of dominance. Did they actually protect people, or did they simply intimidate them into obedience? You can sense both truths hanging in the air. A lord who rules from a mound above you is safer, but also distant. Power becomes vertical, and every inch of height is political. By now, the process of building feels almost ritualistic. First, the surveyor walks the land, reading its slopes like a priest reading omens. Then the labourers dig the ditch, piling the earth into a cone. Logs are driven deep to hold it firm, and the tower rises slowly, its beams smelling of pine and sap. When it is finished, the Lord stands on top to bless it, perhaps even sprinkle wine over the ground. The first night inside the new keep is a mixture of pride and unease. Every creak in the wood sounds like an omen. You feel that unease too. The wind whistles through cracks in the timber, and the moonlight slips through the gaps in the planks. Somewhere in the dark, a sentry coughs. A dog growls softly. The Lord's wife, wrapped in furs, wonders whether this new castle will hold against fire or frost. It is more than a home now. It is a wager against the unknown. The quirky side of this history appears when you learn that many early castles were not built to last. Some were temporary, razed quickly during conflicts, then abandoned or burned down. In some cases, the builders never even returned. These were castles of necessity, not permanent footprints of ambition left in the soil. When archaeologists find their remains today, they are little more than circular ridges in the earth. But in their time, they changed everything. And still, evolution creeps forward. Stone is coming. The wooden walls that once comforted lords begin to feel flimsy. Every time lightning strikes or raiders throw torches, the lesson repeats itself. Wood burns, stone endures. Across Europe, masons are perfecting their craft, carving limestone and sandstone into blocks that will resist both fire and time. You can almost hear the future calling, the steady clink of chisels echoing from distant quarries. You take one last look at the wooden world around you. The smell of resin and wet bark fills your nose. Somewhere in the bailey, a harp is playing softly, an attempt to bring grace to a place built on fear. The sound floats upward, fragile as the walls that contain it. The dawn light turns the motte golden. Farmers emerge from the gates to tend the fields, while guards yawn and stretch on the ramparts. Life goes on as it always does, perched between safety and risk. You realize now that castles are not merely architecture. They are psychology made visible. They express humanity's need to separate inside from outside, us from them, comfort from chaos. Every shovel of earth and every plank nailed in place says, "We will endure." Still, questions linger. When the Romans built their forts centuries before, they used precision, uniformity, and empire-wide systems. These medieval builders have none of that. Their castles are as individual as fingerprints. Why? Historians still puzzle over how local traditions shaped each one differently. Was it about terrain, about resources, or about the temperament of the lord himself? Maybe all three. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the map again, dotted with mounds. Each is a seed of power, a proto-city, a promise. In time, these mounds will sprout into stone towers, into keeps, into the silhouettes we recognize on postcards and in fairy tales. But for now, they are earthy, crude, and real. The morning air is cold against your face. Smoke rises, bells ring faintly in the distance, and the world of early castles hums to life around you. Somewhere, a young mason watches the wooden walls and thinks, quietly, that stone would look better. He will be right. The morning mist clears over the channel, and you find yourself standing on the shore of England in the year 1066. The air smells of salt and iron, and the cries of gulls blend with the clatter of ships unloading horses. The Normans have arrived, and with them comes a new age of fortification. You can almost hear the splash of oars as the invaders row toward destiny. You follow them inland, trudging over damp meadows and narrow paths. Behind the troops comes a different kind of army. Carpenters, stonecutters, blacksmiths, and labourers. Their tools gleam in the pale light. They are not here only to fight, but to build. Within weeks of the Battle of Hastings, the first Norman castles rise on English soil. It is astonishing to think of the speed. Wooden towers, earth mounds, and palisades appear like mushrooms after rain. Each one is both fortress and message. We are in control now. Chroniclers of the time record that William the Conqueror ordered castles at key points across England, from the coast to the heartland. One of the earliest was at Pevensey, built almost immediately after the invasion. These new strongholds served a clear purpose. They were not only to guard against rebellion, but also to remind the newly conquered population that resistance was useless. You can imagine peasants glancing up at these alien towers and realizing the world had changed overnight. The wooden keeps soon became symbols of occupation. Their corners were square, their gates high, their lookouts relentless. The Normans did not invent the castle, but they perfected the art of spreading it. Archaeological evidence shows how fast the design evolved once they took root in England. Within a generation, timber would start to give way to stone. Curiously enough, not every Norman castle was built from scratch. Some reused old Roman sites or even ancient hill forts, taking advantage of their height and views. It was a clever blend of past and present, old power recycled into new authority. Imagine walking through such a place. Under your feet lies the ghost of Roman walls. Above you, the fresh timbers of Norman ambition. The layers of history feel almost alive. You walk through one of these early castles now, perhaps the one at Windsor or Dover. The wooden stairs creak beneath you. Inside the keep, tapestries hang against draughts that sneak through the gaps. The lord sits by the fire, his armour stacked in the corner, his hounds dozing nearby. The smoke curls upward and escapes through a hole in the roof. It is crude but commanding. Not everyone agrees on what made the Normans so successful at castle building. Some historians suggest it was their centralized organization, a kind of medieval logistics miracle. Others think it was simply necessity. They were invaders in a hostile land, and walls meant survival. Both ideas carry weight. You can almost feel the tension between efficiency and desperation in every plank nailed into place. By the late 11th century, England looks utterly transformed. The skyline bristles with towers, castles guard bridges, river crossings, and market towns. They control roads and resources, and their lords rule like miniature kings. You imagine yourself travelling across this new landscape, your journey punctuated by rising keeps that cast long shadows over villages. Life becomes organized around those towers. Everything trade, justice, even gossip revolves around the castle. An odd little detail surfaces from old manuscripts. Some Norman garrisons were required to keep trained ravens as messengers. Whether this was efficient or merely eccentric remains unclear, but it shows how even communication adapted to the new militarized order. Picture a raven taking off from a wooden tower, a scrap of parchment tied to its leg, cutting across the grey sky toward another fortress, a whisper with wings. Inside, the daily rhythm is relentless. Soldiers drill in the courtyard, servants carry buckets, cooks turn spits over open flames. The noise echoes off wooden beams, a reminder that this is both home and war machine. Children play near the well, oblivious to politics, their laughter mixing with the ring of iron on iron. The scent of meat roasting mingles with the sharp tang of oil used to keep weapons from rusting. According to royal records from the 12th century, castles soon became administrative centres as well. Taxes were collected there, disputes settled, prisoners held. The keep became a courtroom, a treasury, and sometimes a prison all at once. In many ways, it was the beating heart of medieval government. Yet questions linger. Were these castles built for defence or for domination? Did they truly keep people safe, or did they simply remind them who held the power? Some scholars continue to debate this point, arguing that fear was as much a building material as stone itself. You sense that both sides are right. Safety and oppression often share the same walls. Time passes in your mind's eye. Wooden towers crumble, replaced by stone keeps. The first great ones appear. The White Tower in London, Rochester Castle, Norwich, and Durham. You touch the cold stone, rough yet solid beneath your fingertips. The shift feels permanent now, a declaration that the Normans have come not to plunder but to stay. Life inside grows more refined, though still harsh by modern standards. There are separate chambers for the lord and lady, storerooms for grain, and small chapels carved into the walls. The smell of incense sometimes masks the scent of damp. At night, the flicker of torches casts long, restless shadows along the staircases. By the 12th century, these castles dominate not only the landscape but the imagination. They appear in songs and legends. The common folk whisper about ghostly knights who guard treasure beneath the towers. The castle becomes both symbol and myth. And yet, you can feel a quiet irony beneath it all. The same walls that protect also isolate. The higher the tower, the lonelier the lord. Power brings silence, and sometimes suspicion. In the darkness of a stone corridor, even footsteps echo like secrets. As you look across the fields, you see more towers rising, more villages clustering around them. The age of wood has ended. The age of stone has begun, and with it, the notion of the castle as something eternal. But time, like wind and rain, will eventually test even the strongest walls. For now, you breathe in the cold morning air and listen to the hum of hammers in the distance. The Normans have changed the world, one stone at a time. The wind sharpens as you move inland, past the quiet moors and the edge of forest where new walls rise like the bones of sleeping giants. You can sense a different kind of energy now. These castles are no longer hurried constructions of conquest. They are calculated responses to fear. Each wall is measured, each moat deliberate. The lords who build them have learned that power must not only be taken, it must be maintained. You approach a half-finished fortress. The air is full of the thud of chisels, the rasp of saws, and the low murmur of workers trading jokes in Latin, Norman French, and Saxon English. The smell of wet mortar mixes with that of horses and sweat. This is the new reality of the 12th century. Constant construction, constant anxiety. Records from the period suggest that nearly every noble family of significance begins to reinforce its estates with stone by the mid-1100s. England, Wales, and France glitter with towers that were once wooden. The transformation is staggering and costly. Stone does not forgive mistakes. It requires skill, patience, and money. Those who can afford it do so proudly, for a castle of stone proclaims something no wooden fort ever could: permanence. You walk through an older wooden keep nearby, half rotten from rain and smoke. The scent of decay lingers. You understand why its owner dreams of something stronger. He imagines walls that could not be burned, towers that would not crumble, a fortress that could outlast his children and perhaps even his enemies. Curiously, not all castles are built for battle alone. Some are raised in moments of peace, as gestures of prestige. To host a visiting king in a stone hall is a statement of worth. The richer lords begin to think not only of defense but of design. Windows grow larger, stairways more elegant. What started as a refuge is beginning to flirt with comfort. Inside one of these new strongholds, a noblewoman oversees the household with quiet authority. You watch her move through the hall, her footsteps muffled on rush-covered floors. The air smells faintly of wax and roasted meat. She keeps track of stores, servants, and messages, while outside, the guards patrol the ramparts. The entire structure depends on her unseen labor, yet history rarely gives her a name. Archaeological studies show that women often managed castle estates in their husband's absence, especially during wars or crusades. Their work included not only running the household, but organizing defense, maintaining supplies, and managing finances. The medieval world often underestimated them, but the walls could not stand without their decisions. You pause beside a cold stone parapet. Below you, farmers plough furrows that stretch into mist. The castle is a watchtower over life itself, separating those who rule from those who toil. The design of every wall and ditch is a physical expression of inequality. Yet, paradoxically, these same walls offer safety to the villagers during raids. It is a relationship built on both protection and control. Some experts question whether the massive moats and thick gates were more for defense or display. A deep moat impresses as much as it deters, and a high tower commands loyalty by sheer presence. The debate lingers because medieval architecture is always half functional and half theatrical. Inside, the daily sounds continue. A guard yawns on the battlements. A cook stirs a cauldron large enough to drown a small dog. The air shimmers with heat near the hearth, while icy draughts curl down the stairwell. You run your hand over the wall, feeling its grainy chill. Each stone carries the memory of the hands that placed it there, the rhythm of centuries compressed into silence. One charming but strange piece of lore whispers through these castles. It is said that masons sometimes sealed small animal bones, even entire birds, inside the foundations to bring luck or ward off collapse. Whether superstition or symbolism, it shows how even the most practical builders still believed in mystery. You step outside and walk around the curtain wall. The sunlight glints off narrow arrow slits, thin as paper from afar, but deadly from within. The moat below is filled with green water and a scattering of reeds. Somewhere a frog croaks, breaking the stillness. The presence of these castles changes everything about medieval life. Markets grow in their shadow, craftsmen settle nearby, and travelers measure distance by which fortress they pass next. A map of walls becomes a map of civilization itself. Roads bend to avoid, or connect, them. Even the rhythm of speech changes, as new words enter languages: gatehouse, turret, dungeon. Not everyone celebrates this transformation. Church leaders complain that castles encourage arrogance and private warfare. Chronicles survive that describe priests cursing new towers from their pulpits, warning that God disapproves of such pride. Yet the towers rise anyway. Stone has a way of ignoring sermons. You sit for a while at the edge of a ditch filled with rainwater. The reflection of the walls trembles on the surface. It strikes you that fear and beauty have merged here, indistinguishable. These places are built to repel violence, but they also attract admiration. Even enemies pause to stare. As dusk falls, torches flicker along the ramparts. The sound of a horn echoes faintly across the valley. You imagine travelers hurrying toward the gates before night closes in. Inside, tables are being set for supper, dogs are fed, and guards switch their posts. The castle breathes like a living thing, each person a cell within its great body. Debate continues among historians about what these castles truly represented. Were they prisons of ambition or the backbone of medieval stability? Perhaps both. Every stone you see here carries that contradiction. The air grows colder. A single candle burns in an upper window, and the night hums with the promise of both safety and suspicion. You realize that walls, no matter how high, cannot shut out human nature. They only contain it for a while. You turn away as the last light fades, leaving the fortress silhouetted against the evening sky. Somewhere within its walls, someone dreams of building higher, stronger, more beautiful. The age of fear is only beginning to find its shape. The year feels heavy with stone dust and ambition. Across Europe, masons' hammers echo from dawn until dusk, and you can almost taste the chalky air. The humble wooden towers of a century ago are gone. In their place rise great keeps that dominate valleys and rivers, shimmering pale in morning light. This is the moment when castles stop being temporary shelters and start becoming monuments to endurance. You wander up a winding path toward one such stronghold. The road is steep and muddy, but the view above draws you on. High walls crown the hilltop, their stones cut so cleanly that the joins seem invisible. Smoke drifts from a few chimneys, curling lazily into the grey sky. The scent of wet moss clings to the walls, mingled with the tang of iron from the blacksmith's forge below. Evidence from royal building accounts suggests that by the middle of the 12th century, some castle projects took decades to complete. They required teams of stonemasons, carpenters, quarrymen and carters, all organized with military precision. Even the smallest mistake could weaken a tower or crack a vault. The logistics of it all was staggering for a world without cranes or engines. Inside the castle yard, you watch masons chip away at limestone blocks, their rhythmic strikes producing a hypnotic music. Dust sparkles in the sunlight, coating their hair white. Nearby, apprentices carry buckets of lime mortar that sting their skin. Every detail matters. The angle of each stone, the curvature of an arch, the slope of the stair. It feels less like building and more like devotion. A curious detail recorded in an old French manuscript mentions that some masons marked their stones with unique symbols, tiny carvings that served as both signatures and quality marks. They believed these signs would ensure they were properly paid, but others saw them as blessings of craftsmanship. If you look closely at the walls today, those faint carvings still whisper the pride of anonymous hands. These new castles are vast. Square keeps like those at Dover, Rochester, and White Tower dominate the skyline. Their walls are so thick that the sound of footsteps inside seems swallowed by stone. You walk through a doorway narrow enough for one person at a time. The air inside is cold, carrying the faint smell of damp straw and smoke. Light filters through slit windows, painting thin ribbons of gold across the floor. At the heart of this transformation lies more than engineering. It is philosophy in stone. The builders have learned that strength alone is not enough. Design matters too. Rounded towers begin to appear, less vulnerable to rams and siege engines. Corridors are planned for defense, with spiral staircases winding upward to the right, favoring sword arms of defenders. Everything serves purpose. Yet scholars still debate whether these innovations came from native ingenuity or from contact with the East through the Crusades. Did returning crusaders bring fresh ideas, or were similar concepts already blooming across Europe? The answer may never be clear, but what you can see, standing here, is a convergence of cultures shaping architecture into art. The keep is no longer just a stronghold. It is the stage for medieval life in all its contradictions. The great hall smells of wax and smoke. You hear laughter, the scrape of benches, and the clatter of trenchers being filled with roasted meat. A minstrel tunes his lute in the corner. The lord listens with weary eyes, already thinking about taxes and borders. According to records from the reign of Henry II, some lords began employing full-time architects and master masons to oversee construction. It was a new profession, part engineer, part artist, and part magician in the eyes of ordinary people. To raise such walls seemed almost supernatural. Villagers whispered that masons worked with secret formulas, or that demons helped lift stones too heavy for human strength. An odd superstition lingers in those tales. Builders sometimes buried coins, charms, or even fragments of holy relics within the first layers of foundation to ensure stability. The belief was that a blessed beginning would lead to an unshakable end. Whether faith or fear inspired it, you cannot help but admire the poetry behind the act. Outside the castle, the landscape changes too. Roads are paved, bridges fortified, and new villages spring up to serve the labourers. The economy begins to orbit the fortress, each wall a sun around which lesser lives revolve. Merchants bring wine, salt, and spices. Stonemasons' lodges become schools of craft and brotherhood. A culture of construction sweeps the continent. Still, not everyone sees castles as progress. Chroniclers complain that the nobility spend fortunes on walls while peasants starve. Some monks describe the rise of castles as a sign of moral decay, the stone equivalent of pride. Yet those same monasteries hide behind thick gates when raiders come. Contradiction seems to be the theme of the age. You step out onto a parapet, wind tugging at your cloak. Below you stretches the countryside, quilted in fields and forests. The river glints in the distance, winding toward unseen towns. From here, you understand why lords build high. Power is not just protection, it is perspective. To see far is to feel safe. In the great hall below, a feast begins. Torches flare, goblets clink, and a dog sneezes in the corner. The warmth feels earned after years of building. Yet in the silence between songs, you can still sense unease. The higher the walls grow, the more isolated life becomes inside them. Even celebration echoes with loneliness. Some historians note that the most imposing castles of this century, like Chateau Gaillard in France, were built as much from anxiety as ambition. Kings feared rebellion as much as invasion. A castle was both shield and shackle. From outside it looked unbreakable. From within, it sometimes felt like a gilded prison. As night falls, the moonlight turns the stone silver. You hear the soft murmur of guards changing posts, the slow creak of chains as the drawbridge lifts. The castle settles into its nocturnal rhythm, a sleeping giant breathing in the dark. You can feel the centuries gather around you like mist, heavy with both pride and sorrow. The age of wooden walls is now only a memory. The stone giants have taken their place, beautiful and severe. And as you walk away down the hill, you know they will still be standing long after the hands that built them have turned to dust. Morning light spills across the courtyard, painting the stone walls gold. You can smell baking bread from the kitchen and hear the distant clatter of hooves on the drawbridge. The castle is alive again. Inside these walls, life unfolds with a rhythm as complex as the architecture itself. Lords and ladies rise with the sun, servants hurry through shadowed corridors, and the air hums with duty. You walk through the great hall, the heart of it all. The floor is strewn with fresh rushes mixed with herbs to mask the scent of smoke and people. The high ceiling disappears into dimness, its beams blackened from years of firelight. Banners hang from the walls, their colours faded but proud. At the far end, a long table stands ready for the Lord's meal. His chair, carved with lions and vines, gleams with use. The hall is not only a dining place, but a courtroom, an audience chamber, and a theatre for authority. Every word spoken here carries weight. Records from household accounts reveal that a large castle could employ dozens of permanent staff: cooks, falconers, armourers, clerks, and stable hands. Some served for life, inheriting their positions from their parents. The castle was not just a fortress, it was a miniature world, complete with its own economy and hierarchy. Each servant knew their place and the chain of command as surely as any soldier. You follow the scent of fresh bread into the kitchen. The air is thick with warmth and smoke. Pots bubble over the fire, and you hear the hiss of fat dripping into the flames. A cook yells instructions to a scullion who is barely old enough to lift a pan. The rhythm of the kitchen never stops. Even in peace, castles are engines of work. An interesting note from a 13th century ledger shows that spices such as cinnamon, cloves, and pepper were common in noble households. They travelled across continents, from Asia to the ports of the Mediterranean, before finding their way into these grey halls. To taste such flavours was to experience power itself. Each pinch of spice was a declaration that the castle reached beyond its walls into the far corners of the known world. You step out into the courtyard, where sunlight glints off buckets of water and the metallic clink of armour rings through the air. A young page struggles to lift a helmet twice his size. Knights prepare their horses, checking straps and sharpening blades. The smell of leather mixes with hay and oil. Despite the bustle, there is an underlying order, a choreography learned through repetition. Some scholars have suggested that the castle's daily life reflected a microcosm of medieval society itself. Rigid ranks, clear duties, and constant reinforcement of status. Every gesture, every meal, every interaction served to remind people of where they stood. The Lord's table was raised above the rest, not for comfort, but for symbolism. The physical elevation mirrored the social one. Curiously, within these walls, there were spaces of surprising intimacy. The solar, a private chamber for the Lord's family, was often warmed with carpets, cushions, and glass windows if they could afford them. It was here that the family would gather away from the noise of the hall, to read, sew, or play music. The soft strum of a lute or the faint hum of a song might float through the corridors, gentle as candlelight. A fragment of poetry from the period describes the feeling well. Within the walls of stone I find my garden small, yet whole the world within. It is a reminder that castles were not only strongholds of power but also fragile islands of emotion. Debate continues among historians about how comfortable these places truly were. Some argue that they were surprisingly luxurious for their time, with heated chambers and feather bedding. Others insist that they were cold, draughty, and plagued by vermin. The truth probably lies between the two. To a peasant, the castle was paradise. To its residents, it was simply home. You climb a narrow staircase spiraling upward. Each step is worn smooth by centuries of feet. The air cools as you reach the ramparts. From here you can see the surrounding fields stretching far into the horizon. Smoke rises from cottages in the valley. A shepherd moves like a dot across the green slopes. The castle stands as the link between heaven and earth, protection and control. Inside, a clerk sits bent over a parchment, recording rents and tithes. The scratching of his quill sounds almost musical in the stillness. He dips the nib into the ink and sighs, his breath misting in the cold air. His job is unglamorous but vital. The written word keeps the machinery of the castle turning. Without records, no taxes are collected, no debts remembered. There is another scent drifting through the corridors now, beeswax used to polish the furniture and waterproof leather. Everything is functional, yet a quiet pride lingers in how things are maintained. The same care that went into building these walls continues in the way people inhabit them. You pause at the chapel door, hearing faint chanting. The echo of prayer fills the stone chamber, mingling with smoke from the candles. Religion is not separate from castle life, it breathes through it. The Lord's family kneels beside servants, at least in theory, though rank shows even in devotion. Not all is solemn, of course. Festivals bring laughter and chaos. Jugglers, musicians, and storytellers fill the great hall. The scent of roasted boar, spiced wine, and pine smoke drifts through the air. The laughter of guests bounces off the vaulted ceilings. For one night, fear and politics yield to celebration. Then the torches burn out, the songs fade, and duty resumes. It is strange to realize that these same halls, designed for war, have become places of life, love, and music. They hold both the clang of swords and the hush of lullabies. Every brick remembers both victory and sleep. As dusk settles, the fires are banked, and the castle begins to quiet. Somewhere a door creaks shut, and the sound echoes softly down the hall. The last servant bows to the steward and retires. The air cools, the smell of smoke fades, and the fortress exhales. You stand alone in the courtyard, looking up at the battlements glowing faintly in starlight. Behind those walls, people rest beneath layers of privilege and stone, dreaming of safety that never feels complete. The night closes around the castle like a cloak, and you feel it breathe, alive, ancient, and patient. Dawn glows softly through a thin veil of fog, and the castle stirs again. You hear the faint rustle of skirts before you even see her, the lady of the castle moving quietly through the hall. Her gown whispers against the floor as she checks the servants, her presence both gentle and commanding. This is her domain now, not of war but of order. You follow her into the solar, where morning light pours through a small window of thick glass, tinted just slightly blue. The air smells faintly of lavender and beeswax. A half-finished embroidery frame sits by the chair, golden thread glinting in the sunday. It is easy to picture her here, sewing as she listens to the faint echo of hammering from the courtyard below. Letters from noble households reveal that women in the Middle Ages often managed more than domestic duties. They balanced accounts, arranged marriages, oversaw estate repairs, and organized defenses when their husbands were away. The modern image of a passive lady in waiting hardly fits the reality. Many acted as stewards, commanders, even negotiators. They ruled in absence, and sometimes in silence. You can almost see her sitting beside a table covered with parchment. Her hand moves steadily as she dictates to a clerk. Send grain to the mill at once. Repair the roof before the next rain. Her tone is calm, practical, decisive. The castle runs because of her rhythm. Curiously, records from a few surviving letters show that some noblewomen kept falcons of their own, not for sport but companionship. The birds were a symbol of status, yet their care required patience and skill. A falcon's hood might be embroidered with silk, its jesses braided with thread of gold. A lady might release it from the tower at dawn, watching it soar into the clouds like a fragment of her own freedom. The corridors around her smell of smoke, perfume, and damp wool. Servants bow as she passes, whispering to each other once she is gone. To them, she is both mistress and mystery. Her authority is absolute within these walls, yet it depends on a delicate balance of grace and fear. Some historians have suggested that women in castles shaped medieval culture more deeply than chroniclers acknowledged. They preserved music, commissioned manuscripts, and kept correspondence alive. Their influence travelled through ink and melody rather than steel. The troubadour songs of courtly love that filled Europe's halls were not written for warriors, but for women like her, whose presence softened the edges of an age built on iron. You pause by the chapel door and see her kneeling there. Her hands are clasped, her lips moving in silent prayer. Candlelight flickers across her face, highlighting the calm lines of devotion. Perhaps she prays for her husband on campaign, or for the harvest, or maybe simply for peace. It is strange to think that faith and fear live so comfortably side by side here. The debate among scholars continues about how much independence noble women truly had. Some claim they were bound tightly by patriarchal law. Others point to records of widows who managed vast lands alone. The evidence is scattered but compelling. Reality, as always, lies somewhere between the two extremes. Outside the chapel, you hear children laughing. The ladies' daughters chase each other through the courtyard, their bright gowns flashing in the sunday. A nurse calls after them, scolding half-heartedly. The sound is brief but vivid, a reminder that even within stone walls, childhood finds a way. There is a curious household superstition that women whispered to each other in those days. Never sew after sunset, or you might stitch misfortune into the fabric. You imagine her smiling faintly at such advice, following it not out of fear but tradition. Every culture finds small rituals to make uncertainty bearable. In the kitchen below, the steward's wife manages the cooks with sharp efficiency. The lady trusts her completely, for their partnership holds the castle together. Orders flow down from the solar like water through channels, reaching every worker in turn. The rhythm of labor, though invisible to history books, is what makes this fortress breathe. Sometimes, at night, she walks along the battlements when she cannot sleep. The stars above shimmer cold and clear. From here, she can see the villages that depend on her, small clusters of lights like scattered jewels. The wind tugs at her cloak, carrying faint sounds of dogs and distant bells. For a moment she feels both powerful and utterly alone. An old song, recorded centuries later, speaks of women who watched their husbands sail away to war and never returned. The refrain calls them keepers of stone. It is fitting. While the men fought for glory, the women kept the world intact. Inside the great hall, she presides over supper. Her voice carries just enough authority to silence squabbles among guests. She listens, smiles, and asks questions that remind everyone who truly understands the pulse of this place. Her husband may command armies, but she commands loyalty. Some chroniclers claimed that castles without strong women often fell into disorder. Letters describe estates collapsing when widows were replaced by male stewards unfamiliar with local life. The unseen hand of management mattered as much as the drawbridge or the gate. You picture her at the end of the evening, removing her jewelry by candlelight. The gold catches the flame for a moment before disappearing into shadow. She sighs softly, her duties complete for the day. The walls around her feel both protective and confining, like the folds of her own dress. Outside, an owl calls from the trees. Somewhere below, guards trade quiet jokes as they patrol. The night settles heavy and still. Inside the solar, the lady closes her eyes, her thoughts drifting between hope and worry. The castle rests again, held together by stone, loyalty, and her unseen patience. She is not in the chronicles, but her presence endures in every well-kept hearth and orderly storeroom. History may forget her name, yet the walls remember her footsteps. You step beyond the inner walls where the morning air smells of wet stone and roasted grain from the marketplace below. The castle's shadow stretches far, covering rows of thatched roofs and narrow muddy lanes. This is the outer world that breathes because the fortress exists. A castle without its town would be an empty husk, and the town without its castle would be exposed and poor. Together, they form a strange balance of protection and dependence. The hum of voices reaches you before you enter the gate. Merchants shout prices, children laugh, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer strikes a steady rhythm. You walk among the stalls, brushing past wool cloaks, baskets of onions, and barrels of salted fish. The air smells of smoke, manure, and bread. It is alive, a mosaic of survival. According to surviving market charters from the 12th century, lords often granted special rights for trade to grow near their castles. These boroughs became the seeds of modern towns. Traders paid tolls for protection, and, in return, the castle gained a steady flow of food, goods, and taxes. What began as a military outpost evolved into an ecosystem. A curious entry in an old French tax roll lists payments in both coins and eels, a reminder that medieval economics could be as creative as it was practical. Barter still ruled the day, but money was finding its way into every corner of life. The castle lord took a share of everything that crossed his gate. The villagers move carefully, respectful of the guards posted near the drawbridge. Power is visible here, not abstract. A mounted knight passes by, and the crowd instinctively parts. His armor glints dully in the sunlight, and the clinking of metal fills the air. You feel the mix of awe and resentment that defines medieval society. The castle protects, but it also demands. Some researchers argue that the rise of castle towns marked a turning point in European social life. For the first time, people who were neither nobles nor peasants could gather wealth through trade. A new class of merchants and artisans emerged, shaping the future quietly beneath the shadow of stone towers. Others, however, believed the towns remained too dependent on their lords to call it freedom. The debate continues, as most good debates do. You stop at a tavern near the gate. The smell of ale, cheese, and smoke fills the dim interior. Farmers huddle around wooden tables, discussing weather and taxes. A minstrel plucks a few soft notes on a lute. Someone jokes about the lord's hunting failures, but in a whisper. The walls have ears, and the punishment for insolence is not light. Through the small window, you glimpse the castle looming above. Its towers rise like watchful eyes, impossible to ignore. Even in moments of laughter, the presence of authority presses close. The castle defines every horizon. An unusual fragment from a town chronicle tells of an annual fair that lasted 12 days, complete with music, feasts, and even mock battles for entertainment. Peasants, travellers, and nobles mingled briefly as equals before returning to their separate worlds. For a few days, the lines blurred, and the town felt almost free. It is hard not to smile at the thought of jugglers and knights sharing the same muddy square. You step outside again as the sun climbs higher. The air buzzes with the sound of saws and carts. New houses are being built, close enough to touch the castle's outer walls. The Lord encourages this growth, for more people mean more taxes and more labour in times of war. The market becomes permanent, and the smell of fresh bread becomes as much a symbol of the castle's power as its flag. Some historians suggest that these castle towns helped shape the very idea of community. Safety brought people together, trade made them stay. Over generations, these clusters of life grew into cities. Yet the memory of their origins remained in the street names and in the invisible line between noble ground and common earth. You find yourself standing by the town well, listening to gossip. A woman in a red shawl tells another that the lady of the castle has ordered new tapestries. A boy boasts that he saw a falcon released from the tower that morning. Information flows through whispers faster than letters ever could. There is a legend still told in some English villages about a baker who hid inside a flour barrel to avoid paying tolls at the castle gate. He was caught when he sneezed. The story survives not because it is important, but because it is human. Every great fortress casts small comic shadows like that. By midday, the bell from the castle chapel tolls, echoing across the roofs. Work pauses, heads bow briefly, and life resumes. The sound unites the town and fortress in one rhythm. Religion and routine hold them together as tightly as walls and markets. You walk back toward the drawbridge, the smell of tar and horses filling the air. Guards nod as you pass, their armor creaking slightly. Inside the gate, the world feels quieter, cooler. The noise of trade fades behind thick stone. In that moment, you realize how seamlessly the two worlds depend on each other. The castle gives safety, the town gives sustenance. The walls protect and imprison in equal measure. Power and livelihood are locked together like the hinges of a gate. Some modern archaeologists have noted that the outlines of these castle towns often remain visible today, even when the castles have fallen. Streets still circle invisible walls, and markets still gather where gates once stood. Time forgets the names but remembers the pattern. As evening approaches, smoke rises from 100 chimneys. The sky turns pink above the battlements. Below, merchants count coins by candlelight, and children chase each other through puddles. The day closes softly, the same way it has for centuries. From the ramparts above, a guard watches it all in silence. The view is beautiful, but it carries responsibility. To rule is to be watched as much as to watch. The castle glows in the fading light, proud and still. Below it, the town hums like a heartbeat. Together, they form the pulse of the medieval world. The morning sky darkens with smoke. You can smell pitch, oil, and fear. A siege has begun. From the ramparts, you watch shapes moving in the distance. Soldiers in mismatched armor dragging wooden machines across the muddy ground. The air is filled with the groan of wheels and the low murmur of men preparing for war. Inside the walls, everything changes. The hum of daily life gives way to the rhythm of survival. A messenger rushes through the courtyard, his cloak torn and muddy. Bells ring from the chapel tower, calling everyone to their stations. The gates creak shut, and the portcullis slams down with a heavy thud. The town below scatters in panic as villagers hurry toward the castle for shelter. They carry sacks of grain, squawking chickens, and frightened children. The space within the walls grows crowded and tense. Records from military chronicles of the 12th century describe these sieges in relentless detail. They could last weeks, months, or even years. Food ran short, water fouled, and disease spread faster than courage. Defenders prayed as often as they fought. A siege was not a storm but a slow suffocation. You walk along the parapet where archers stand ready. Their arrows are lined neatly in baskets, fletched with goose feathers. The air smells of waxed strings and sweat. Below, enemy engineers assemble great wooden towers and catapults. The ground shakes as stones crash into the outer walls. Each impact echoes through the castle like a heartbeat gone wrong. An unusual tactic appears in a few medieval accounts. Attackers sometimes hurled rotting carcasses or beehives over the walls to spread terror or sickness. It sounds absurd, almost comic, until you remember the stench and the flies. Nothing was too strange if it might break morale. You picture a defender covering his mouth as a dead horse bursts apart beside him, the air thick with decay. The Lord strides along the battlements, his chainmail glinting in the grey light. His face is calm but pale. He knows this is not just a battle but a test of patience. The castle was built for moments like this, yet every stone now feels too thin. Inside the keep, women and servants fill barrels with water, bake hard bread, and store salt meat. Children huddle in corners, clutching each other. The chapel becomes both refuge and hospital. A priest moves from person to person, murmuring prayers that sound almost like lullabies. Archaeological findings from sites like Chateau Gaillard and Kenilworth show layers of fire-scorched stone, collapsed tunnels, and arrowheads embedded deep within mortar. These are the scars of sieges, the physical memories of desperation. They tell stories of both defiance and hunger. Curiously, some chroniclers note that truces were occasionally called so both sides could bury the dead or exchange small gifts. A strange civility in the midst of horror. One account describes an enemy commander sending a barrel of wine to the defenders, perhaps out of admiration or mockery. The line between cruelty and courtesy was often thin. You hear a shout from below as the attackers roll a siege tower forward. Its wooden sides groan under the strain. Arrows rain down, whistling through the air. A soldier beside you looses one back, the bowstring snapping against his wrist. The smell of smoke grows stronger. Someone shouts for boiling water, and the kitchen workers rush to the parapet carrying steaming cauldrons. The boiling water hisses as it pours over the attackers' heads. A few defenders cheer, their voices hoarse. The noise blends with the screams and the dull thuds of catapult stones striking the wall. It is chaos turned into music, a grim rhythm that seems to shake the very air. Some military historians question how often the famous boiling oil was actually used. It was expensive and precious, unlikely to be wasted. More often it was heated sand or water that burned equally well. Still, the image of boiling oil has survived in every tale and film because it feels perfectly medieval, resourceful, cruel, and theatrical. Inside the keep, the lady of the castle oversees the wounded. Her gown is stained with ash. She ties bandages made from torn linens and whispers words of comfort. Her calm steadies the servants. She does not flinch at the thunder outside. For her, every scream is a command to endure. Days blur into nights. The fires never go out. Food dwindles. You can almost feel the exhaustion creeping through the air, heavy as the smoke that clings to the walls. The castle groans but does not fall. Each stone seems to know its duty. At last, a trumpet sounds from beyond the walls. The enemy retreats, leaving behind broken ladders and burned engines. The defenders stand in stunned silence before cheers break out. The victory feels hollow but real. They have survived. In the aftermath, the courtyard fills with smoke and sorrow. The wounded moan softly. The smell of blood mingles with that of wet ash. Crows circle above, black dots against the pale sky. The castle has done its job, but at a price. Some experts believe that these endless sieges changed the way people thought about time itself. Life inside the walls became measured in endurance rather than days. A siege was not an event, but a season. You can feel it in the stillness that follows, the eerie quiet after so much noise. As dusk settles, torches flicker along the battlements. The walls stand battered but proud. Down below, the fields are littered with remnants of war, broken arrows, splintered wheels, and torn banners fluttering weakly in the wind. You walk once more along the rampart. The smell of burning wood lingers. The people inside begin to laugh again, softly, uncertainly. It sounds fragile but alive. For now, the castle has proven its worth. Yet everyone knows that peace never lasts. Somewhere beyond the hills, another army is already marching. The smoke of war fades, but the world does not rest. You find yourself under a blazing eastern sun, where the air tastes of dust and salt. It is the age of the Crusades, and the same men who once built castles in the damp hills of Europe now build them beneath the deserts of Syria and Palestine. They have carried their tools, their fears, and their blueprints across continents. Out here, the stone gleams pale against the horizon, and the scent of myrrh mixes with the smell of hot mortar. You stand on a hill overlooking a vast plain. Below you, workers carve foundations into the bedrock while knights argue about walls and towers. The heat presses down like a weight, and the sound of chisels echoes in the dry air. This is a new kind of castle, born not only from defense but from faith. It guards holy ground, or so they believe. Records from the 12th century describe how the Crusaders constructed formidable fortresses across the Levant. Crac des Chevaliers in modern Syria and Belvoir Castle in Israel were among their masterpieces. Built with precision and layered defenses, these strongholds turned the landscape itself into armor. Their builders understood something essential. Out here, distance is the enemy. To survive, they had to make islands of stone in a sea of sand. A remarkable design feature appears for the first time in these eastern castles: concentric walls. The idea was simple yet ingenious. One ring of defense could fall without dooming the rest. This innovation would travel back to Europe and reshape architecture for centuries. You can trace its influence in later Gothic strongholds that owe their logic to these desert experiments. An odd detail from a Crusader's diary mentions that camels carried the heavy stones when oxen collapsed in the heat. It is a strange image, beasts of the desert dragging the raw bones of Christian ambition across dunes. Sweat and faith built these walls together. The sound of a distant horn pulls your attention to the horizon. You see the shimmer of another fortress, one not built by the Crusaders but by their Muslim opponents. They too mastered the art of defense, raising citadels that blended elegance with strength. The great walls of Aleppo, Cairo, and Damascus were already standing when Europeans arrived, and local engineers taught the newcomers lessons in both geometry and patience. Some scholars suggest that the meeting of these two worlds sparked a quiet exchange of knowledge. European masons learned about water channels, inner courtyards, and ventilation techniques from Middle Eastern builders, while Eastern architects borrowed ideas about tower placement and gatehouses. Whether through trade, diplomacy, or sheer observation, architecture became a dialogue across faiths. You wander into the courtyard of a Crusader castle. The air is cool despite the sun outside, thanks to narrow windows and clever ventilation shafts. Soldiers rest in the shade, their armor dull with dust. The chapel nearby smells faintly of incense and sweat. A priest hums a hymn that drifts into the corridors like smoke. The stone floor beneath your feet feels warm from years of footsteps. Archaeological excavations at sites such as Arsuf and Montfort have revealed layers of cultural fusion: European carvings alongside Arabic inscriptions, pottery from both sides of the conflict found in the same kitchens. History, it seems, cares little for borders. People shared water, traded tools, and sometimes even ideas in the pauses between wars. Curiously, some castles in the Holy Land were designed with small secret passages leading to hidden wells or escape tunnels. Legends claim that these exits were used by knights to fetch water under siege or to flee in desperation. No one can say how many of those tunnels actually existed, but the idea captures the spirit of survival that defined the age. As the sun begins to sink, the air cools slightly. You stand atop the wall, watching shadows stretch across the desert. The horizon glows red, and the smell of dust fills your lungs. Somewhere below, a call to prayer rises from a distant village. The sound carries softly on the wind, mingling with the faint ringing of church bells from the chapel. Two worlds breathing in rhythm for a fleeting moment. Not everyone agrees on what these Crusader castles truly represented. Some historians view them as outposts of imperial ambition, built to dominate foreign lands. Others see them as symbols of cultural exchange, fragile bridges between civilizations. Both views feel true when you stand among the ruins today. The stones are silent, but they still hold the memory of conversation. Night falls quickly in the desert. Torches flicker along the ramparts, and the stars unfold like cold jewels above. The soldiers below whisper stories of home, of green hills and misty rivers they may never see again. The castle around them feels both foreign and familiar, a piece of Europe grafted onto alien soil. You can almost taste the loneliness in the air. The wind carries the scent of salt and old fire. The walls, though strong, seem to tremble under the weight of distance. A knight stands at the edge of the battlement, staring east toward the dark horizon, his thoughts somewhere between prayer and exhaustion. In time, these castles will fall. Some will be abandoned, others reclaimed and reused by local rulers. The desert will reclaim what the Crusaders built, wrapping it in silence and sand. Yet their influence will drift homeward with returning masons, shaping cathedrals and fortresses far away. You leave the castle behind, walking down the rocky path lit by moonlight. Each stone crunches beneath your boots, and the air cools against your face. The memory of those eastern walls lingers, vast and echoing, like a dream half remembered. The builders may be gone, but the ideas they carved into the desert still breathe in every castle that followed. A pale mist curls over the river as dawn rises in Europe once again. The echoes of Crusader horns have faded into legend, but their lessons have come home. You walk along a muddy road, lined with oaks and frost, and there on the next hill stands another fortress, familiar yet refined. The air smells of wet stone, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. Castles are no longer isolated refuges or faraway experiments. They have become a system, a web of control stretching across kingdoms. By the 13th century, rulers understand what the Normans once only guessed. To rule a land is to build upon it. Kings now raise fortresses not as private shelters, but as instruments of government. Each castle marks a pulse in the political body, part of a network that reaches from coast to frontier. The days of lone lords guarding their valleys are fading. The state itself is taking shape in stone. Records from royal treasuries show meticulous lists of building expenses, labour wages, and shipments of stone from distant quarries. Some kings kept travelling architects on payroll, moving them from site to site to ensure a consistent style. Castles are now planned like chess moves, each one reinforcing another. You climb toward one of these royal strongholds. The path is paved, the walls gleam pale in the weak sun, and banners flutter lazily in the breeze. Inside, soldiers drill in silence, their armor gleaming. The smell of oil and wet hay mixes with the iron tang of discipline. The structure feels less like a home and more like a machine. An intriguing letter from a 13th century royal clerk praises Edward I's programme of castle building in Wales. It lists Caernarfon, Conwy, Harlech, and Beaumaris as rings of iron around a restless land. These castles were not simply defences, they were statements. Each stood at a river crossing or harbour, projecting authority into every corner of the conquered region. Curiously, travellers from France noted how these British castles differed from those of the continent. Their designs favoured symmetry and grand scale, less about hiding behind walls and more about showing the permanence of royal power. They were as much palaces as fortresses, announcing that the crown ruled by divine right and by engineering. Some historians suggest that this era marks the birth of centralized administration. Castles became centers of taxation, law, and logistics. Within their walls, scribes recorded harvests, sheriffs issued decrees, and royal messengers rode out along well-guarded roads. The keep, once a symbol of isolation, now served as the heart of communication. You enter a great hall lined with clerks hunched over parchment. The scratching of quills fills the air like soft rain. Seals are pressed into wax, documents rolled and tied. The faint smell of ink mixes with the sharper scent of smoke from the hearth. Bureaucracy, though dull in sound, hums with the energy of empire. Outside, masons still labor, adding new towers and curtain walls. Stone dust drifts like mist, and the rhythm of chisels carries over the fields. Every hammer strike is both construction and declaration. A royal castle announces its master to everyone within sight. A peculiar entry in one building record reveals that even color played a role in politics. At Caernarfon, alternating bands of limestone and sandstone created striped walls meant to resemble the walls of Constantinople, tying the English kings symbolically to the grandeur of the ancient world. Architecture had become a form of propaganda. Not everyone admired it. Monks complained that these endless constructions drained the treasury and bled the countryside of labourers. Chroniclers accused kings of vanity. Yet the people living near the walls often felt safer, and markets flourished in their shadow. Progress and oppression walked hand in hand, as they always do. Some experts question how much control these fortresses really gave to their monarchs. A garrison might hold a valley, but loyalty cannot be built from stone alone. Rebellions still flared, and besieged castles sometimes surrendered faster than expected. Power, no matter how fortified, remains fragile. You walk along the outer wall and pause by a guard post. The soldier nods politely but does not speak. His breath fogs in the cold. Behind him, the view spreads wide. Rivers like silver threads, villages like clusters of smoke. The castle dominates it all, a silent overseer. Inside the royal chambers, the furnishings have grown finer. You can smell beeswax on polished wood, the faint perfume of imported linen. Kings and queens now travel with entire courts, turning castles into moving capitals. Musicians rehearse in one corner, while ambassadors wait nervously in another. The fortress has become a stage for diplomacy. An interesting fragment from a Welsh chronicle recounts how royal builders were required to swear oaths of secrecy, preventing them from sharing architectural plans with potential enemies. Knowledge itself had become a weapon. It was the medieval version of classified information, kept under lock and key. You can almost hear the overlapping sounds of this world, the rhythmic clank of hammers outside, the rustle of parchment inside, and somewhere beyond the gate, the laughter of traders selling spices to soldiers. It is both peaceful and tense, fragile and powerful. The sun begins to sink, and the sky burns red above the towers. From this vantage point, you sense how the castle has changed yet again. It is no longer only a shield or a home. It has become a statement about how the world should be organized. One stone upon another, rule upon rule. The torchlight flickers across the battlements as you descend. Behind you, the banners ripple in the cold air, each carrying its message to the wind. Power now moves in patterns, mapped and measured, written into stone and ink. The medieval world has grown vast and interconnected, and the castle stands at its center, both crown and cage. The morning fog curls through the valley like breath as you approach a castle under construction. The rhythmic strike of hammers rings out long before you see the walls. Dust and lime fill the air, clinging to the back of your throat. Here, the true artisans of the Middle Ages are at work. Kings may order castles, and lords may pay for them, but it is the craftsmen who make them live. You step closer, your boots crunching over chips of stone. Masons in wool tunics and rough gloves work methodically, their tools flashing in the pale light. Each strike sends a sharp echo bouncing between unfinished towers. The smell of mortar, freshly cut wood, and sweat mixes into something earthy and human. Documents from 13th century guild records reveal that these workers traveled from site to site, forming brotherhoods of skill. They were not bound to any one lord but to their craft, carrying knowledge like pilgrims carry faith. Their marks, carved discreetly into the blocks, still trace their invisible hands centuries later. One fascinating discovery from an excavation in northern France showed a mason's toolkit buried intentionally within a castle wall. Some believe it was a ritual offering, a way to dedicate the structure to protection and fortune. Others think the man simply lost it. Either way, it remains a quiet reminder that even in grand designs, accidents and hope coexist. The master mason stands apart, studying the wall's alignment with a simple plumb line. His face is streaked with dust, his eyes sharp with calculation. Every block, every arch depends on his judgment. To him, stone is not dead matter, but a living partner. He knows its moods, its cracks, its hidden veins of strength. Inside a wooden hut nearby, scribes keep records of wages and materials. You can smell ink and candle wax, hear the soft rustle of parchment. Every nail and cartload of sand is accounted for. Even beauty requires bureaucracy. Some experts point out that medieval builders worked without blueprints as we know them. Instead, they relied on memory, geometry, and full-scale sketches scratched onto plaster floors. It was an architecture of intuition. The knowledge passed from master to apprentice through demonstration, gesture, and trust. You pause beside a quarry at the edge of the site. The cliffs are scarred from months of labor. Carts creak under the weight of blocks, oxen snort and strain, and the air hums with shouts and cracking whips. Dust settles over everything, turning the workers pale like ghosts. From here, you understand the cost of every tower that ever touched the sky. Curiously, a few chronicles mention that some masons carried small relics of saints sewn into their clothes for protection. Stonework was dangerous, and superstition filled the gaps where safety knowledge could not. One slip, one crack, one moment of bad luck could end a life. So faith worked alongside physics, an invisible scaffold of hope. The rhythm of building becomes hypnotic. You hear saws biting into wood for scaffolding, wheels squeaking, and men chanting work songs to keep time. There is a strange peace in repetition. The castle rises like a slow heartbeat, steady and inevitable. At midday, the workers rest beneath a canopy of stretched cloth. Bread, cheese, and ale are passed around. Laughter fills the air, mingling with the scent of food and wet stone. These men live simply but with pride. They know that when the castle is complete, their names will not be written anywhere, but their work will outlast all memory. Some historians still discuss how much design credit belonged to architects and how much to masons. Were the drawings imposed from above, or did the hands that shaped the stone also guide its form? The truth, as always, lies somewhere between collaboration and command. Genius is rarely solitary. You walk through what will one day be the Great Hall. The unfinished walls echo with footsteps. A small boy runs by carrying a bucket of nails, his face smeared with lime. Apprentices like him began their training young, learning to read the stone before they could even read words. It is said that a master could tell where a block came from just by the sound of his hammer striking it. As the day wanes, shadows deepen inside the scaffolding. The sound of work softens to a hum, then fades. You stand still, watching the castle skeleton glow in the sunset. Wooden beams cast long, thin lines across the raw stone. The air cools, carrying the scent of damp earth and crushed time. An intriguing note in a mason's letter from the 1200s mentions that some builders refused to work after sunset, believing the night belonged to spirits who could undo what daylight had made. The superstition is charming, but it also makes sense. In the dark, ladders break, ropes slip, and mistakes multiply. You leave the site as the workers pack their tools and light small fires for supper. The sound of laughter and song rises again, softer now, floating into the violet sky. The castle behind them glows faintly, a shape of promise and endurance. It is unfinished, imperfect, but already beautiful. You think of the centuries ahead, of how these walls will soon echo with kings and battles, with music and mourning. The builders will be forgotten, their marks hidden beneath plaster and time, yet their hands will live in every curve and joint. As night falls, the last hammer rings out like a bell, then silence settles over the valley. The wind moves through the empty arches, carrying the faint scent of lime and wood smoke. You realize you have just witnessed not construction, but creation, the patient birth of permanence. The day begins with the sound of a bell. Its tone rolls across the courtyard, deep and steady, wrapping the castle in quiet reverence. You follow the sound toward the chapel, small but dignified, tucked within the inner ward. The air grows cooler as you step inside. The scent of beeswax and incense fills your lungs, mingling with the faint smell of damp stone. Light pours through a narrow window, coloring the floor in shades of gold and blue. Here, in this sacred corner of the fortress, faith hums beneath the surface of daily life. Every castle of note has a chapel, no matter how small. The builders understood that prayer was as necessary as walls. In times of war, people came here to beg for victory. In times of peace, they came to whisper gratitude for survival. Charters from the 13th century record the expense of maintaining castle chapels, candles, chalices, vestments, and the wages of chaplains. These chaplains often served as secretaries, confessors, and advisors to their lords. They heard sins that would never reach the ears of chroniclers and blessed decisions that shaped kingdoms. You sit in a wooden pew, its surface smooth from generations of hands. The air trembles with quiet. A priest begins to sing, his voice thin but beautiful, echoing against the stone. The Latin words roll like water over the congregation of servants and soldiers. For a moment, rank dissolves. Everyone kneels the same way, heads bowed, the flicker of candlelight dancing over armor and cloth alike. An odd but touching practice was common in many castles. When a new wall was finished, the masons and chaplain would sprinkle holy water along it and pray for its endurance. It was a small ceremony, half construction ritual and half act of faith. Even the most practical builders sought divine approval for their work. You look up at the chapel ceiling. Tiny painted stars glimmer above you, faded now but still delicate. Some chapels hid small frescoes, showing saints holding swords and shields, their gazes calm and watchful. The message was clear: faith guarded what stone could not. Scholars often note how religion shaped every part of castle life, not just the chapel. Meals began with blessings. Contracts were signed under the eye of a crucifix. Even the act of war was draped in sacred language, turning battle into holy duty. Yet, paradoxically, these same walls housed ambition, greed, and betrayal. The castle was both a house of God and a monument to human pride. The priest finishes the hymn and steps toward the altar. He raises a chalice that gleams faintly in the candlelight. You can almost feel the room hold its breath. Outside, the world goes on horses neigh, guards shout, hammers ring, but in here, time pauses. Archaeological evidence from castles such as Château de Vincennes and Dover reveals hidden crypts beneath chapels, where relics or the bones of founders were interred. Some tombs still bear faint inscriptions asking for eternal peace. It seems fitting that those who built in stone also chose stone as their resting place. Curiously, a few chroniclers mention that during long sieges, chapels sometimes doubled as storerooms for food or ammunition, sacred and practical needs intertwined. It is hard not to smile at the thought of holy relics sharing space with barrels of salt pork. Survival does not always wait for ceremony. You step outside into the sunlight again, blinking against its brightness. The contrast feels sudden, almost shocking. The castle hums with activity. In the courtyard, servants haul barrels, soldiers train, and a falconer calls softly to his bird. Yet beneath all this movement lies the same invisible rhythm you felt inside the chapel. faith hums quietly under every task. Some historians continue to debate whether medieval people truly believed in divine protection or simply feared the consequences of disbelief. The truth is probably more subtle. Faith, in its many forms, gave structure to uncertainty. When the world was fragile and violent, the idea that someone watched over you from above brought comfort, even if only imagined. You wander along a shaded corridor lined with small statues. Their faces are worn smooth by time. One figure, a carved angel, has lost its wings. Another clutches a sword almost eroded into dust. The sculptor who made them likely worked in silence, each stroke an act of prayer. In a quiet corner, you notice a candle flickering before a small image of the Virgin Mary. A servant has left a sprig of rosemary beside it. The fragrance cuts through the heavy air, bright and clean. Such gestures appear simple, but they reveal the tenderness that endured even in harsh lives. As afternoon light fades, the chapel bell rings again. Its sound rises through the towers, carried by the wind across the valley. You imagine villagers below pausing at their work, listening, perhaps crossing themselves out of habit or hope. The castle's faith spills beyond its walls, binding the land in unseen threads. A chronicle from the 14th century recounts that, during storms, some lords ordered their chaplains to climb the towers and ring the bells to drive away lightning. Science may not have agreed, but hearts did. The world felt safer when the sky answered with sound. You return to the courtyard as dusk settles. The glow from the chapel window spills softly onto the cobblestones. Servants hurry past, heading for the hall, their laughter low and tired. Above them, the faint music of evening prayers lingers in the air like mist. You pause, breathing in the scent of wax and cold stone, feeling the day's heat fade. Faith has given the castle its rhythm. It blesses meals, seals oaths, forgives sins, and lights the dark. Within these walls, belief is as ordinary as breathing, as constant as the tolling of the bell. When the last note of prayer fades into silence, the castle feels still again, its heartbeat slow but steady. You realize that behind every wall of defense and ambition, there lies a quieter purpose, to remind those within that endurance, like faith, begins from within. The dawn breaks clear and cold. Frost sparkles on the battlements, and the first breath of wind carries the scent of pine from the north. You set out across the changing landscapes of medieval Europe, tracing how geography sculpted every fortress in its image. A castle is never born from imagination alone. It grows from the soil beneath it, shaped by mountains, rivers, and climate. In the rugged highlands of Scotland, castles cling to cliffs like grey birds nesting in stone. The wind howls through narrow slits, and the scent of sea spray hangs heavy in the air. Builders here use the rock itself as foundation, carving stairways directly into the hillside. Each fortress is both shelter and part of the mountain, cold to the touch and unyielding to time. Historical surveys of Scottish strongholds, such as Dunatar and Stirling, reveal how their walls blend almost invisibly into the cliffs. They are not separate from the landscape, but extensions of it. The natural defense of elevation replaces moats, and mist serves as camouflage. To approach one is to feel watched by the land itself. You move southward, where England's gentle hills host a different kind of fortress. Here, stone meets strategy in elegant proportion. The castles of the Midlands rise amid rivers and farmland, their moats glinting like mirrors. You can smell wet grass and cattle, hear the murmur of streams feeding the defences. Unlike the stark northern keeps, these are centres of administration as much as power. In the warmer air of France, castles spread wider, more open to sunlight. Gardens begin to appear within their walls, filled with herbs, fruit trees, and fountains. The scent of rosemary and thyme mingles with the smell of wet limestone. French builders favour beauty alongside strength, a harmony that softens even their thickest ramparts. An unusual note from a French architect's notebook mentions the use of oyster shells in lime mortar to make walls brighter and more reflective. The idea seems decorative, Yet in sunlight, those walls shimmer faintly, turning fortresses into beacons of light. Even in war, people sought beauty. Across the Pyrenees, Spanish castles gleam with traces of Islamic artistry. The legacy of Al-Andalus lingers in every arch and courtyard. You can almost taste the desert in the air, the dry wind carrying dust and spice. Here, fortresses like the Alhambra in Granada blur the line between palace and fortress. Their courtyards echo with running water, and intricate plasterwork glows golden in the sunday. Archaeologists studying these Iberian sites have found evidence that Moorish engineers introduced hydraulic systems to keep gardens lush, even in arid climates. Such ingenuity turned defense into art. The whisper of fountains became as much a sign of power as any wall or tower. You cross the Alps and feel the air thin, crisp and sharp. The castles here look austere, wrapped in snow half the year. The scent of smoke from wood fires fills the narrow courtyards. Builders use whatever stone the mountain gives them, often granite or volcanic rock, dark and dense. In these heights, walls must resist more than enemies. They fight the cold itself. Further east, in the forests of Bohemia and Poland, castles hide among trees. Their towers rise above pines like watchful fingers. The forest muffles every sound. You can hear only birds, axes, and the echo of church bells carried from miles away. Wood is abundant here, and even stone castles have timber roofs and walkways, creaking softly in the wind. A curious tale from a Polish chronicle tells of a lord who released trained hawks from his castle tower to patrol for approaching enemies. Whether true or embellished, it captures the intimacy between nature and architecture in these wooded lands. As you travel south to Italy, the air warms again. The castles grow lighter, more ornamental. They guard roads, vineyards, and harbours. Some even borrow designs from ancient Roman fortresses still standing nearby. The scent of olive oil and sea salt fills the air. Towers glow pale against the blue sky. These are castles of commerce as much as defence, symbols of trade routes and ambition. Some historians believe that Italian fortresses mark the beginning of a shift from pure military necessity towards civic identity. Cities like Florence and Siena began fortifying themselves not only against invaders, but to proclaim independence. Stone became a language of pride. In Eastern Europe, the frontier castles of Hungary and Transylvania face open plains. The wind there never stops. You feel it tug at your cloak, dry and cold. Builders here learn to use earthen ramparts and wooden palisades in combination with stone. The result is a flexible, layered defense suited to vast, flat lands. An intriguing discovery near a Hungarian ruin uncovered traces of ancient step fortifications beneath later medieval stonework, showing how old traditions merged with new techniques. Castles are never purely inventions of their time. They are conversations between generations of builders. As evening falls, you stand on a high ridge overlooking the scattered lights of a distant town. The wind carries the scent of pine, sea, and smoke all at once, as if the entire continent breathes beneath you. Each region has molded its castles like clay, shaping them according to need and nature. Some experts argue that geography determined more than architecture. It shaped mentality too. People who lived in valleys built open courtyards for community, while those on cliffs built narrow halls for survival. The land taught them how to live and how to fear. The sun dips below the horizon, and the sky turns the color of cold iron. A bell rings faintly from somewhere below. You imagine all those castles scattered across Europe, each lit by torches, each unique yet bound by the same purpose: to endure. The earth itself is their blueprint. You close your eyes and hear it: the wind in the mountains, the splash of water in moats, the cry of gulls above coastal towers. Geography has given each fortress its voice. Together they form a chorus that still echoes through time. The world is now draped in the glow of the 13th century, and castles have reached their golden age. The builders have learned from generations of struggle, blending grace with strength until stone itself seems to breathe. You stand before one of these great fortresses at sunrise, its walls glowing amber beneath a pale sky. The air smells of wet earth and river mist, and every tower catches the first light like a crown. This is the era of mastery. Castle design has matured into science and art. Engineers know how to channel pressure through arches, how to carve spiral staircases that never twist against the sword arm, how to balance beauty with menace. To build now is to proclaim not only power but refinement. Royal records describe enormous projects commissioned by kings, bishops, and merchants alike. They hired architects who travelled across borders, blending ideas from France, England, and the Mediterranean. The exchange of design has become as important as the exchange of coin. At a site like Chateau Gaillard in France, you would hear the constant rhythm of chisels, smell lime drying in the sun, and see the pale gleam of new-cut stone. The keep rises high and round, flanked by curtain walls lined with arrow loops. Within, courtyards bloom with gardens, fountains, and colonnades. Defence and elegance live side by side, each improving the other. A chronicler of King Philip II wrote admiringly that such castles appeared to grow from the earth like trees of marble. That description fits. The architecture has evolved beyond necessity into expression. Castles have become monuments to vision. An amusing account from an English mason's notebook describes lords competing over the size of their moats. One insisted his be wide enough for 3 barges to pass side by side. Another demanded swans to float upon his. Pride, it seems, is as enduring as stone. Yet even vanity produces beauty when guided by craft. Inside, the rooms have changed too. You walk through a great hall lined with tapestries depicting hunting scenes, their colours rich and alive. The smell of beeswax and rosemary fills the air. Light from tall windows touches polished wood and glints on silver cups. It feels less like a fortress and more like a living organism, adapting to both comfort and command. Archaeological surveys show how innovations from this century transformed living conditions. Stone vaulting replaced timber ceilings, reducing the risk of fire. Latrines were built into the walls with chutes draining outside, improving sanitation. Kitchens moved to separate buildings to keep smoke away from living quarters. Even heat was managed through wall flues that carried warmth from central fireplaces. The result is striking. Castles are now both homes and engines of survival, able to host hundreds during a siege while offering comfort during peace. You can hear the hum of life everywhere, the sound of a minstrel tuning his harp, the chatter of servants in the kitchen, the clang of a forge nearby. The entire complex pulses with purpose. Scholars sometimes refer to this period as the architectural flowering of the Middle Ages. The great building programs of Edward I in Wales, Frederick II in Sicily, and the Capetian kings in France stand as testaments to human ambition tempered by patience. Each castle reflects the personality of its patron. Edward's are stern and geometric, Frederick's blend cultures like a mosaic, and the French ones balance delicacy with grandeur. Curiously, some building accounts list expenses not for weapons but for musicians, stained glass, and imported silk. Even in fortresses, art has found a place. One document from Italy records the purchase of coloured tiles shaped into patterns meant to please visiting dignitaries. Beauty has become part of diplomacy. Not everyone admires this elegance. A few monks write bitterly that nobles now care more for painted walls than for prayers. Others see the prosperity as divine reward. Opinions differ, but no one can deny that castles have become mirrors of their age, orderly, ambitious, and endlessly inventive. You wander up to the battlements. The view stretches across green fields and winding rivers. The breeze carries the scent of wildflowers from the valley below. From up here, the fortress feels eternal, untouchable. Yet even as it stands unshaken, time is already shifting beneath its foundations. The seeds of change lie hidden, waiting for new kinds of war. Some experts believe the perfection of these 13th century castles marked both a climax and a beginning of decline. Once walls reached this level of sophistication, further improvement became difficult. The very strength of the system made it rigid, unable to adapt quickly to new threats. Perfection, in history, often carries the shadow of its own end. You descend again to the courtyard, where horses stamp and clatter on the cobblestones. A page carries a tray of fruit toward the hall, the scent of apples trailing behind him. The smith's fire glows red in the distance, sparks rising like stars. Everything feels secure, serene, complete. As evening falls, the castle glows with torchlight. Music drifts through the windows, mingled with laughter and the gentle murmur of voices. Somewhere, a poet recites verses about loyalty and love, his words blending with the crackle of fire. The walls echo softly, absorbing it all. You pause by the gate and look back. The towers reach into the darkening sky, their flags barely moving in the still air. This is the age when humanity believed it could master both nature and fear through craft. The stones seem to hum with quiet pride. In the hush that follows sunset, you realize that the medieval castle has become more than defense or dwelling. It is a vision of permanence, a declaration of what people can achieve when imagination and survival intertwine. The night settles slowly, wrapping the fortress in calm. For now, it stands perfect, untouched by the coming storms. The evening sky glows a deep blue, and the air carries the scent of smoke and damp stone. You find yourself inside a castle after sunset, walking along corridors where shadows cling to every arch. Torches flicker against the walls, and their light catches strange patterns in the masonry. This is the hour when the castle reveals its hidden corners, the ones not shown to guests or kings. You pass through a narrow doorway and feel the temperature drop. The air is thick with dust and the faint smell of old wood. Somewhere below, water drips rhythmically, echoing through the silence. This is the underworld of the fortress, cellars, tunnels, and chambers meant for secrets. Chroniclers from the 14th century describe these hidden spaces with both fascination and fear. Some were built for defense, some for escape, and some for things no one spoke about. A good castle hid as much as it showed. You descend a spiral staircase so tight that your shoulder brushes the cold stone. The steps are worn smooth by countless feet. At the bottom, a heavy door stands slightly ajar. Inside, you find a narrow passage that seems to stretch endlessly into darkness. Your torchlight flickers over damp walls where salt crystals glitter faintly. Archaeologists studying English and French castles have found entire networks of tunnels beneath certain keeps. Some lead to nearby rivers or forests, others to forgotten storage vaults. No one knows how many still lie undiscovered, filled with silence and secrets. A curious discovery at Nottingham Castle uncovered a hidden passage carved into sandstone, wide enough for a single rider. Local legend claimed it was used by the sheriff himself during a rebellion. Whether truth or rumor, it shows how every fortress carried a heartbeat of paranoia. You follow the tunnel deeper until it opens into a small chamber. The air smells of iron and damp earth. Against the wall stands a rack of rusted tools, and in the corner, a wooden chest mottled with mold. You can almost feel the ghost of someone standing here centuries ago, waiting, listening, holding their breath as soldiers passed overhead. Some historians believe that the idea of the secret passage became exaggerated by later storytellers. They argue that most were simple drainage tunnels or supply routes. Others insist that escape routes were essential, especially in regions plagued by siege and betrayal. Perhaps both are true. Facts and fears often blend until they are inseparable. Moving back through the corridors, you come across a small spiral staircase, leading upward this time. It ends behind a tapestry in the great hall. You push aside the fabric and step into warmth and light. The sudden contrast is almost startling. Servants move quietly, pouring wine and arranging plates. None of them notice you. The hall hums with calm routine, unaware of the darkness just beneath its feet. An account from a medieval steward's ledger mentions that castle architects often hid narrow passages for servants to move unseen. These hidden doors allowed food to reach the Lord's table still warm, and ensured that privacy was never interrupted. Practicality often disguised itself as mystery. The quirks of medieval imagination filled these spaces with legends. One tale from Germany tells of a knight who vanished into a wall and was never seen again. Another from Wales claims that treasure was buried within a secret chamber, guarded by spirits who whispered in the dark. Whether truth or invention, such stories gave personality to stone. You pause beside a tall window, the cold glass trembling with wind. The courtyard below glows faintly in torchlight. Somewhere out there, are cellars filled with wine, secret tunnels winding toward the forest, and small rooms no one has entered in generations. A castle is never entirely known, not even to those who live in it. Some researchers argue that this complexity reflects medieval thought itself. People saw the world as layered, sacred above, sinful below. The same pattern shaped their buildings. Chapels reached upward toward heaven, while storage vaults sank downward toward fear. Between those extremes lay daily life, always balanced on a threshold. A peculiar superstition recorded by travelers claimed that every castle had one cursed door. No matter how carefully it was built, there would always be a place where strange noises gathered or drafts whispered like voices. Builders would mark such spots with a cross to quiet the unseen. You walk again through the inner corridors. The stone feels alive now, humming faintly with stories you can almost hear. The smell of wax and old iron lingers. Somewhere behind a wall, you sense a space hollow enough to hide generations of memory. As you climb back toward the courtyard, the torches flicker against the stairwell. The night outside has turned thick with fog. The world seems smaller, wrapped in stillness. Above you, the towers rise like silent guardians. Below, the tunnels breathe secrets into the cold earth. A few poets from the later Middle Ages compared castles to human souls. Bright halls above, dark chambers below. It is an image that fits perfectly. Every fortress holds both splendor and shadow, faith and fear, truth and invention. The fog drifts across the courtyard now, soft and white. The light of a single lantern glows near the gate. Somewhere, a door creaks shut. The castle settles into quiet again, its secrets tucked safely beneath the stone. You stand still for a moment, feeling the chill air against your face. You can almost sense the hidden life beneath your feet, whispering that perfection is never complete without mystery. The unseen keeps the living awake, reminding them that even walls have memories. Morning light filters through a high window, touching the stone floor with thin ribbons of gold. You follow the faint hum of activity that signals the waking of another castle day. Yet this time, your steps lead not toward the Lord's chambers or chapel, but downward, into the working heart of the fortress. Behind every feast, every battle, every polished hall, lies an invisible world of hands that make it all possible. The smell reaches you first. Smoke, bread, tallow, and the faint tang of horses. You walk through a narrow passage into the courtyard, already alive with motion. Servants haul buckets from the well. Dogs chase each other between barrels. And somewhere a cook shouts for more firewood. The castle is awake. Documents from household rolls show that large fortresses often supported hundreds of workers. Some were permanent residents. Others came from nearby villages to trade labor for food and safety. There were cooks, grooms, washerwomen, scribes, guards, falconers, pages, and masons repairing cracks after every storm. It was an entire village compressed into walls of stone. You pause near the kitchen doorway. The heat rolls out in waves, carrying the scent of roasted meat and herbs. Inside, the air is thick with noise. Knives clatter on wooden boards, spits turn slowly over the fire, and a boy stirs a pot taller than himself. The cook commands the room like a general, tasting sauces with quick precision. A charming record from a 13th century menu lists an entire peacock roasted with its feathers reattached for display. It sounds extravagant, yet such feasts were not only for pleasure, they were theatre, performances of wealth meant to impress guests and intimidate rivals. Even the food was part of the fortress's defense. You cross to the stables where the smell shifts to hay and leather. Horses snort softly as grooms brush their coats until they shine. The rhythmic scrape of metal on hoof echoes off the walls. In one corner, a farrier works over a glowing forge, hammering shoes into shape. Sparks leap like fireflies. The air hums with strength and sweat. Some historians note that caring for horses consumed nearly as much effort as maintaining the walls themselves. War required speed as much as armor. Without the stable, no knight could fight, no message could travel. The castle's heart beat in hooves as much as in drums. A curious story preserved in a steward's account tells of a lord who named every horse in his stable after virtues: courage, faith, mercy. When one died, he buried it with ceremony and a carved stone marker. Perhaps he felt closer to his animals than to the squabbling nobles at his table. You walk on toward the laundry, where the sound of rushing water fills the air. Women kneel beside wooden tubs, their hands red from the cold. The scent of lye soap bites your nose. Cloth flaps on lines strung between towers, snapping in the wind like banners of labor. Life here is constant motion, repetition, and resilience. In the guardroom, men sit sharpening blades and mending mail. The scrape of whetstone on steel has its own rhythm. Someone hums an old marching tune. They talk of rumors and weather, of wages and sore backs. It is the sound of camaraderie stitched together by boredom and duty. Archaeological studies of castle refuse pits reveal discarded bones, pottery, and broken tools, small evidence of this daily life. Through them, historians reconstruct the patterns of ordinary people who never appear in royal records. Their work built the comfort others enjoyed. Some scholars argue that castles were less the homes of lords and more the workplaces of the many. Every tower was a workshop, every hallway a passage for labor. From sunrise to sunset, the fortress thrived on motion. At night, silence was the rarest luxury of all. You find the blacksmith again, hammering beside the open forge. The smell of hot iron fills the air. He lifts a glowing horseshoe, eyes squinting against the glare, then plunges it into water. Steam hisses upward, and he smiles faintly, satisfied. In that sound, you hear centuries of persistence, the unbroken rhythm of craft. Curiously, a few castle accounts mention musicians and jesters kept on permanent salary. Their role was not only entertainment, but morale. Laughter, like stone, was a tool of endurance. In hard winters or long sieges, a song could hold despair at bay better than any weapon. As noon approaches, you pass through the servants' quarters. The walls are plain, the air thick with the scent of straw bedding. On a small table sits a loaf of bread and a jug of weak ale, a modest meal for those who make royal banquets possible. You feel the warmth here, the closeness of bodies and voices. Hierarchy may divide, but labor unites. Some experts have observed that the structure of castle life mirrored the society outside its walls: order, repetition, and faith in routine. Everyone, from lord to stable boy, played a role. Remove one, and the harmony faltered. The castle's strength was not only in stone, but in the rhythm of cooperation. Evening settles again. The kitchen fires burn low, the courtyard quiets, and the smell of bread gives way to smoke and rest. A dog lies curled near the gate. The servants retreat to their rooms, weary but content. Above them, the lord dines under candlelight, unaware perhaps of how much his comfort depends on those unseen hands. As you look back, you realize that the true life of the medieval castle lies here, among the cooks and grooms, the guards and children, the laughter and tired sighs. These are the invisible souls who kept the walls alive long after kings had left. The fortress was never only a monument to power, it was a living body, its heartbeat human. The night sky is clear, stars scattered like cold embers above the towers. You stand on the battlements, and hear a low rumble far away. It is not thunder. The world is changing, and the sound belongs to something new. Across Europe, strange weapons are appearing. Heavy barrels of bronze that spit fire and smoke. The age of stone is about to tremble. You watch as dawn creeps over the horizon, revealing soldiers dragging metal tubes mounted on wooden frames. Their faces are smudged with soot. The air smells sharp and metallic, like a storm before lightning. Gunpowder has entered the story. Early records from the 14th century describe these primitive cannons with both awe and fear. Chroniclers wrote of thunder that could shatter walls and deafen men. The first guns were unreliable, sometimes exploding before firing, but their psychological power was immense. Sound itself became a weapon. You descend to the courtyard where blacksmiths work beside piles of strange new objects, iron balls, barrels, and wooden carts. The smith's hammer strikes sparks into the air. The smell of sulphur and oil burns your nose. The soldiers speak in low voices, half curious, half wary. They have seen what this new fire can do. A curious note from an Italian engineer's letter describes how early gunners stuffed cannons with bundles of cloth soaked in pitch to keep the powder dry. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not. Many died testing these machines, yet the progress continued. Humanity had found a way to turn the sky's fury into its own. You step beyond the walls to the open field where target stones stand. The first shot of the day shakes the ground. Smoke erupts, filling the air with a thunderous crack. The echo rolls through the valley, startling birds into flight. When the haze clears, a section of the test wall lies broken. The soldiers stare in silence, and you can feel the moment when awe turns to realization. The castle is no longer invincible. Some historians call this period the beginning of the end for the medieval fortress. Cannons rendered tall walls a liability rather than protection. Builders scrambled to adapt, thickening ramparts, lowering towers, and adding angled bastions. The age of vertical power began to flatten into geometry. Inside, masons discuss how to reinforce the gates with slanted stone and earth banks. The air in the hall smells of wet mortar and frustration. The Lord sits silently, his face pale in the torchlight. He knows what this means. Centuries of confidence are crumbling beneath a single blast. Archaeological evidence from sites like Château de Coucy and Constantinople's Theodosian walls shows scars left by cannon fire. Some stones split cleanly, as if sliced by invisible hands. Others bear black marks from explosions. The damage tells a story of innovation meeting tradition in brutal conversation. Yet, curiously, gunpowder did not kill the castle overnight. For another century or more, builders experimented. They added circular towers to deflect shots, filled moats deeper with water, and packed walls with earth to absorb impact. The castle became heavier, denser, and more mathematical. A strange anecdote from a Burgundian diary recounts soldiers cheering after firing a cannon that misfired twice before finally sending its ball backward through the camp kitchen. The entry ends with dry humor. The soup was never the same again. Innovation often arrives clumsily. You walk through the inner courtyard as night returns. The air is thick with smoke. Men scrub soot from the walls, coughing. A few argue that the new weapons will ruin chivalry itself. Others shrug, saying that every age finds its own terror. You can sense both dread and fascination swirling together. Some scholars debate whether the arrival of cannons truly ended the castle or merely transformed it into a new kind of fortress. Later centuries would see bastioned citadels rise like stone stars across the land, but the spirit of the medieval keep would fade. Walls would become symbols rather than shields. The next morning, you watch another demonstration. The gunners light a slow match, step back, and wait. The fuse hisses like a snake. Then comes the explosion, louder than anything before. A cloud of black smoke rolls over the ramparts, and a section of wall collapses outward in a roar of dust and stone. The sound echoes for miles. Silence follows. It feels like the end of an era. Inside the great hall, the Lord's chaplain mutters a prayer, his voice shaking. The builders will rebuild, of course, but something deeper has shifted. No wall can promise eternal safety anymore. The realization moves through the room like a cold wind. Curiously, artists begin to capture this fear in their manuscripts. Margins of illuminated texts show tiny figures firing cannons at castles, towers cracking, knights scattering. Humor softens tragedy. People laugh at their own undoing because it makes the future bearable. You stand again on the battlements at sunset. The air smells of ash and iron. The sky glows red, and the world feels uncertain. Yet even now, the castle remains beautiful. Its silhouette against the fading light speaks of endurance beyond its purpose. The walls may no longer be unbreakable, but the idea behind them still stands, to create safety from chaos, even if for a moment. Some thinkers of the time began to wonder whether true strength might shift from stone to order, from towers to laws. The castle's decline mirrors the rise of kingdoms that rule not by fortresses, but by written words and shared belief. As darkness deepens, a soft breeze passes through the arrow slits, carrying the faint echo of that morning's cannon blast. The castle exhales slowly, its age of dominance ending with a sigh rather than a scream. Change has arrived, unstoppable and loud, but the stones still hold their dignity. The days grow quieter after the thunder of cannons. You stand on a hill where grass has begun to reclaim the rubble of a ruined tower. The air smells of rain and crushed stone. The once impregnable fortress looks strangely gentle now, its walls softened by moss and ivy. Time, more patient than war, has begun its siege. By the 15th century, the great castles of Europe are changing, their purposes fading, their silhouettes still proud but uncertain. The royal armies that now roam the continent carry artillery and trained soldiers, making isolated fortresses less useful. Kings prefer to control cities, not strongholds. The world of stone is giving way to the world of strategy and law. Records from royal treasuries show declining budgets for castle repairs, replaced by spending on artillery and court residences. Some lords abandon their remote keeps entirely, moving into towns where comfort and politics mix easily. What were once frontiers of power become symbols of nostalgia. You walk through an empty great hall. Dust floats in the sunlight that filters through cracked windows. The rushes on the floor are old, dry, and brittle underfoot. A single bench leans crookedly near the hearth. You can still smell faint traces of smoke and beeswax, ghosts of dinners long past. A curious detail found in an old steward's letter notes that servants in decaying castles sometimes burned wooden furniture for warmth when coal ran short. In one line he writes, "The table of my master made a fine fire." There is something both tragic and poetic in that image, comfort feeding on memory. Some historians suggest that the decline of castles reflects a deeper shift in Europe itself. Feudalism, that ancient web of loyalties tied to land and lord, begins to unravel. Centralized monarchies rise in its place. The new rulers no longer need hundreds of independent fortresses. They prefer obedience to walls. You step into what was once a chapel. The ceiling has partly collapsed, and ivy crawls along the altar. Birds nest in the corners where candles once burned. The air smells of damp stone and moss, a mixture of decay and renewal. Sunlight streams through the broken roof, turning the dust into gold. The sacred and the ruined coexist. Archaeological surveys reveal how many castles were gradually dismantled rather than destroyed. Stones were taken to build cottages and barns nearby. Towers became quarry piles for humbler homes. In this way, the fortress lived on, scattered across the countryside as doorsteps and walls. An unusual story survives from a village in Burgundy. When the local castle was abandoned, farmers hauled its stones away by night, believing them blessed. They claimed that crops grew better in fields bordered by holy walls. Whether out of faith or thrift, they carried the past into their own lives, one stone at a time. You climb a staircase that ends abruptly in open air. Below, the courtyard is a garden now. Herbs grow where soldiers once stood. The scent of thyme and mint floats upward. Bees hum lazily in the sunshine. What was once a machine of defense has become a sanctuary of calm. Some experts argue that castles did not truly die, but evolved into manor houses and palaces. The architecture of authority simply changed shape. The great keeps gave way to wide halls filled with light, to windows that invited rather than repelled. Power traded battlements for balconies. Still, there is something haunting about the emptiness of these ruins. You imagine voices echoing faintly, laughter, and footsteps lost to time. The air feels thick with memory. You run your hand over the wall, the surface rough and cool, speckled with lichen. It feels alive in its decay. A scholar once wrote that every ruin is a collaboration between human hands and nature's patience. Looking at this place, you understand what he meant. The vines are finishing what the masons began, binding the stones together with roots instead of mortar. Some chroniclers of the late Middle Ages lamented this transformation. They saw it as a loss of discipline, a decline of noble strength. Others welcomed it, calling the end of castles the birth of civility. No longer would men hide behind walls and rule through fear. Now, they would gather in cities, write laws, and build beauty in open air. You wander through what used to be the kitchen. The hearth is cold, filled with fallen bricks. The faint smell of ash lingers, though centuries have passed. A small fern grows in the crack of the stone floor. It seems to whisper that even ruin has its purpose. A curious legend from Wales tells of a ghostly mason who continues to work at night on unfinished walls. Villagers claim to hear tapping in the distance, like a hammer against hollow stone. Perhaps memory itself builds without rest, unwilling to let the past vanish completely. The wind rises, carrying the scent of rain. Drops begin to fall, pattering softly on the stones. The ruin gleams wet, silver and green at once. You step outside and look back one last time. The towers are broken but beautiful, their shapes blurred by mist. Some modern historians describe this period as the twilight of the medieval world. Feudal lords yield to monarchs, knights fade into legend, and castles turn to poetry. The age of walls has given way to the age of words. Yet standing here, you sense that the stones are not mourning their fate. They seem almost relieved. The rain thickens, washing the dust from the carvings. The faces of saints and lions emerge faintly once more, as if blinking awake. For a moment, it feels as though the castle breathes again, alive not in battle but in memory. The sound of rain becomes its final music, soft and forgiving. The rain has stopped, and morning mist curls through the valleys. You walk toward a wide stone structure rising gracefully above gardens and fountains. It has towers, yes, but they are slender and decorative. There are guards, but their halberds gleam more for show than for war. The age of castles has turned into something new. You have arrived at the beginning of the palace. The air smells of roses and polished marble. Music drifts faintly from within, the slow, measured sound of a lute and the quiet hum of conversation. You step through the gate and realize that this place has no moat, no portcullis, no dread of siege. The walls are built not for protection but for display. The great fortress has learned to smile. Royal records from the 15th century reveal a shift in priorities. Money once spent on battlements now funds tapestries, frescoes, and formal gardens. Architecture becomes a language of peace and prestige. The castle, once a symbol of survival, now embodies refinement. You walk into a hall flooded with light from tall windows. The scent of waxed wood and jasmine lingers in the air. Servants glide across the floor carrying silver trays, their steps silent on polished stone. The lord of this place wears velvet instead of armor, and his hands bear rings instead of calluses. He rules through charm, not through fear. An interesting account from the court of Burgundy describes how nobles began holding spectacles of elegance, evening gatherings filled with poetry readings, dances, and elaborate costumes. The goal was to impress rather than intimidate. The sword had given way to the sonnet. Some scholars see this transformation as a reflection of a world less obsessed with defense and more with reputation. Trade, diplomacy, and culture now connect kingdoms more than war does. The castle evolves into a theatre of influence, its walls painted with allegories of virtue and love. You pass into the private chambers. The air is scented with lavender and warmed by small braziers of glowing coals. The furniture gleams with inlaid patterns of ivory and mother of pearl. Tapestries show not battles but gardens, lovers, and mythical creatures. Everything speaks of leisure, though beneath the elegance lies careful design. Even comfort is a strategy. A curious letter from an Italian architect to his patron in 1480 advises, "Build no wall without beauty, for beauty defends more loyally than soldiers." It sounds poetic, but it carries truth. Visitors impressed by harmony are less likely to think of rebellion. Architecture has learned diplomacy. You step out into the garden, where the air smells of water and herbs. Fountains murmur softly among hedges trimmed into geometric perfection. Couples stroll along gravel paths, their voices low and content. The same landscape that once bristled with watchtowers now blooms with order and serenity. Archaeological studies of Renaissance estates reveal how builders reused the stone of old fortresses to construct palaces and terraces. The past literally became the foundation of the new. In these gardens, you sense both triumph and irony. The tools of war turned into ornaments of peace. Some historians argue that this shift was not entirely gentle. Palaces still symbolized power, only now cloaked in civility. The banquet table replaced the drawbridge as the place where alliances were forged and broken. Intrigue moved from battlefield to ballroom. The castle's drama continued, only in silk instead of chainmail. Inside the great hall, musicians play as guests laugh softly. The chandeliers drip with candlelight, casting warm reflections on golden cups. A poet recites verses about loyalty and fate, and the Lord nods with satisfaction. Yet, if you listen closely, the same old hierarchy hums beneath the music. Servants wait in shadows, their faces unreadable, still carrying the weight of unseen labor. Curiously, in this refined world, nostalgia for the older, harsher age never disappears. Nobles decorate their halls with fake battlements, display rusted swords, and commission paintings of heroic sieges. Even as they celebrate peace, they romanticize the struggle that peace replaced. Human memory is reluctant to let go of drama. You wander into the library, where the air smells of parchment and dust. Sunlight touches the spines of books bound in deep red and green. Here lies another kind of fortress, knowledge arranged in perfect order. The medieval walls of defense have become shelves of ideas. Scholars debate philosophy, read Plato, and translate Arabic science. The mind now guards what the sword once did. Some experts have said that the palace represents humanity's reconciliation with fear. After centuries of surviving through walls, people learn to build for pleasure. Yet that comfort carries a quiet anxiety of its own. What happens when peace becomes fragile again? The question lingers beneath every polished surface. As night falls, lanterns glow softly in the gardens. Music floats through the windows, mingling with the scent of night-blooming flowers. You look back at the graceful towers and think of the fortresses that came before them. The shapes are familiar, but the spirit has changed. Power has put on its finest clothes and learned to speak softly. In the hush of twilight, the fountains keep flowing, whispering of continuity. The stones beneath your feet, once quarried for castles, now rest content in peace. You breathe in the warm air and realize that the medieval dream of safety has transformed into a new dream entirely, the pursuit of harmony. The morning light glows soft over the hills, and you find yourself standing before a ruin draped in ivy. The air smells of wet earth and moss. Birds dart through open windows where glass once caught sunlight. The castle, once proud and defiant, has become quiet. What was once a fortress is now a memory, its stones softened by time and poetry. By the 18th century, the age of castles has ended completely. Palaces glitter in cities, armies move with precision, and gunpowder has erased the need for towers. Yet people cannot forget these shapes. Across Europe, travelers begin to climb over crumbling walls, sketching and sighing. The broken silhouette of the past has become beautiful again. A journal entry by an English poet in 1760 describes walking through the ruins of Tintern Abbey and feeling a kind of sweet melancholy. That phrase captures the new mood perfectly. What was once terror now inspires tenderness. People fall in love with decay. You walk through a broken gate where vines hang like curtains. The smell of wildflowers mingles with the scent of damp stone. The ground is uneven, littered with fallen blocks covered in moss. You run your fingers across the rough surface of one stone and feel how soft it has become under centuries of rain. The ruin no longer threatens, it invites. Artists set up easels in these places, painting arches that frame the sky. Travelers write letters by candlelight, describing moonlight shining through empty towers. For the first time, ruins become destinations rather than warnings. The imagination turns loss into beauty. Some historians note that this romantic fascination with decay reflected a deeper longing. The industrial world was growing louder, faster, and harsher. People found comfort in ruins that seemed untouched by progress. They looked backward to remember a time when life felt slower and full of mystery, even if that time had been dangerous. A curious entry from a Scottish diary tells of a nobleman who rebuilt part of his family's ruined castle, but left one tower deliberately unfinished, to remind the eye of time's dominion. The gesture became fashionable. Imperfection turned into art. You climb a narrow stair that ends abruptly in open air. Below, a river curls through the valley, sparkling in sunlight. The wind brushes your face and carries the scent of heather and rain. You can almost hear the whispers of the past, the laughter of children, the clang of blacksmiths, the distant tolling of a chapel bell. They echo faintly, then fade into birdsong. Some experts argue that the romantic view of ruins changed how people understood history itself. Before this time, the past was something to escape. Now it became something to cherish. The broken tower, the cracked arch, the weathered wall, all became symbols of endurance. To crumble was to have lived long enough to matter. Curiously, a few ruined castles even became gardens. Owners planted roses among the rubble, turning old moats into ponds. Dinner parties were held inside roofless halls beneath the stars. The past became decoration, folded into leisure. A fortress that once held soldiers now held laughter and wine. As you explore, you find a carved stone half buried in grass. The faint outline of a lion remains, its mane eroded but still proud. Touching it feels like touching the echo of courage itself. The artistry survives even when purpose does not. Poets and painters of the Romantic era fill their work with such imagery. Wordsworth, Byron, Turner all found inspiration in broken walls and fading light. They saw in ruins the fragility of glory and the beauty of impermanence. The castle had ceased to defend. Now it simply reminded. Not everyone shared the sentiment. Some practical voices called ruins useful only to poets and owls. Others argued that letting them crumble was wasteful, yet the majority preferred them untouched. In their silence, people heard the hum of history. Even in decline, the castle continued to shape imagination. Children played knights among the stones, lovers carved initials into the walls, and wanderers rested in their shade. The fortress, once closed to all but a chosen few, now belonged to everyone. The wind grows stronger, rattling leaves through open windows. The sunlight shifts, turning the ruins gold for a moment before clouds move in. You feel the weight of time not as sorrow but as peace. Everything changes, yet the shape of endurance remains. Some philosophers of the age began to speak of the sublime, that strange mixture of fear and awe inspired by vastness and ruin. Standing among these fallen towers, you understand the idea completely. The castle, though broken, still commands respect. It has become part of nature's own architecture, a reminder that all creations, no matter how mighty, return to the earth. As evening falls, mist drifts through the empty halls. A single bird calls from a window arch, its song echoing faintly. You stand still, breathing the cool air, and realize that the ruins no longer belong to kings or armies. They belong to time itself, and to anyone willing to listen. The stones are quiet now, but they have learned a new language, that of memory and beauty. In their silence lies a kind of truth that no victory could ever declare. The morning mist lifts to reveal scaffolding. The castle you stand before is no longer left to crumble. Workers climb wooden ladders, their hammers ringing through the air. The smell of wet lime and sawdust fills your lungs. A new age has arrived, one that seeks to reclaim the past and polish it until it gleams again. It is the 19th century, and across Europe, the old ruins of the Middle Ages are being reborn. Architects, romantics, and nationalists have turned their gaze to the broken towers and cracked arches of their ancestors. What was once a melancholy symbol of loss has become a blueprint for pride. Official documents from the period describe vast restoration projects commissioned by kings, scholars, and wealthy patrons. They call it preservation, but often it is reinvention. Castles are not merely repaired, they are reimagined. Stone is cleaned, towers rebuilt higher, and interiors filled with stained glass that never existed in their medieval form. History is being dressed for display. You step inside one of these revived fortresses. The floor gleams with fresh polish, and the scent of new wood mingles with the faint chill of old stone. Candles burn in iron sconces made to look ancient but forged only last year. The effect is convincing, almost theatrical. The line between authenticity and imagination has blurred. A fascinating case is the restoration of Carcassonne in France, led by architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. His vision was bold and controversial. He added pointed towers and slate roofs based more on medieval romance than on evidence. Critics accused him of fantasy. Admirers praised him for resurrection. The debate continues even now, echoing like footsteps in empty halls. Curiously, many of these restorations were driven by politics as much as by love of history. A restored castle could unite a nation by reminding citizens of shared heritage. Flags flew once again from towers that had been silent for centuries. Stone became an instrument of identity. Some experts argue that this wave of rebuilding created the modern image of the Middle Ages. When people today picture a castle, they often imagine not the rough, smoky keeps of the 12th century, but these polished 19th century versions. The dream has replaced the reality, yet the dream endures because it is beautiful. You wander through a great hall newly painted with coats of arms and bright murals of knights and saints. The air smells faintly of turpentine and oil. Workers on scaffolds dip brushes into buckets of colour, their hands steady despite the height. The soft tapping of mallets comes from above where carpenters fit beams into the restored ceiling. The castle is alive again, but its heartbeat is imitation. An odd but endearing story comes from Bavaria, where King Ludwig II commissioned Neuschwanstein Castle, a fantasy in stone perched on cliffs above the Alps. It was built not for defense or residence, but for dreams. Inside, scenes from Wagner's operas cover the walls, and chandeliers sparkle like stars. The medieval world has returned, not through archaeology but through imagination. You pause beside a window and look out over the landscape. Below, the modern world hums with trains and telegraph wires, yet within these walls it feels distant. The castle stands like a time machine, inviting visitors to step into a past that never quite existed. Some scholars point out that this era's restorations said more about the 19th century than about the Middle Ages. The Victorians, longing for nobility in an age of factories, built their ideals into stone. The castles they restored were mirrors of their own desires for order, faith, and romance. Yet there is something touching in their ambition. To rebuild a ruin is to believe that the past can still offer meaning. Whether accurate or not, These projects kept history alive when it might have been forgotten entirely. You pass through a newly finished chapel where sunlight spills across fresh glass, depicting Street George and the dragon. The colours ripple across the floor like liquid fire. The smell of paint still lingers, but the feeling of reverence remains real. Perhaps truth lies as much in intention as in accuracy. Outside, tourists begin to gather, sketching and murmuring. The castle has become both monument and museum. Guides rehearse stories that balance fact with legend. You hear a child gasp in delight as she spots the high towers gleaming against the sky. The wonder that once belonged to fear now belongs to imagination. A critic writing in 1883 complained that Europe was turning history into a stage for sentiment. He was right, but perhaps that is what people needed. After centuries of conflict and industrial smoke, beauty was a form of healing. As the sun begins to set, the newly polished stone glows golden. Bells ring from a nearby church, mingling with the rhythmic hammering of the last workers finishing their day. The castle, reborn, stands proud once more, its towers sharp and hopeful against the fading light. You realize that this revival, however imperfect, is another kind of legacy. The builders of the 19th century, like the masons of the 12th, are guided by the same desire, to make something last. The shapes have changed, the motives have shifted, but the longing for permanence remains. The wind picks up, carrying the smell of lime and fresh paint. The last worker descends the scaffold, his boots thudding softly against the wood. For a moment, the castle is silent again, poised between memory and invention, caught in the eternal act of becoming. The air smells different now, faintly salty and warm. You are far from Europe, standing before walls that shimmer under the morning sunday. Palm trees sway nearby, and the call of unfamiliar birds echoes over the horizon. The idea of the castle has travelled, reshaped by new lands and new imaginations. Humanity, it seems, carries its fortresses like memories, rebuilding them wherever fear and ambition meet. You walk closer to the walls of a stronghold in the Middle East, its stone glowing pale gold. The towers are squat and solid, designed to endure heat and wind. Inside, the air is cool, filled with the scent of clay and dust. This is not a European castle, yet its purpose feels familiar. Here, too, rulers sought safety, authority, and permanence. Archaeological surveys of Crusader and Islamic fortifications reveal a shared vocabulary of defense: angled gates, circular towers, and layered walls. Some scholars note that ideas flowed both ways along the ancient trade routes. Builders learned from one another across cultures, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through curiosity. A moat dug in England might echo a design first tested in Syria. You climb a set of narrow stairs carved into the wall. From the top, the desert stretches endlessly, shimmering in the heat. Far below, caravans move slowly like dark lines against the sand. The scent of spice and smoke drifts faintly on the wind. The castle here guards not farmland but trade, protecting routes where gold, silk, and stories flow. A curious inscription found on an ancient wall in Cairo reads, "He who builds in stone builds for God." The phrase captures a truth shared by every civilization. Whether in the mountains of Japan, the jungles of India, or the dunes of Arabia, people raise walls to make their lives feel eternal. You travel east in imagination, to the towering castles of Japan. The air here is thick with the fragrance of cherry blossoms and pine. The castles rise gracefully, layered with curved roofs like folded wings. Unlike the cold symmetry of European towers, these structures seem to breathe. Their wooden beams creak softly, their plaster walls shine white against the sky. Historical records describe how Japanese castles, such as Himeji and Matsumoto, were both fortresses and centers of art. Their design combined strategic precision with aesthetic harmony. Moats reflected the sky, and gardens softened the edges of power. Even in war, elegance found a place. Curiously, Earthquakes shaped their design. Builders used interlocking wooden joints that flexed with the earth instead of resisting it. Strength here was measured in movement, not rigidity. The lesson is subtle but profound. Survival depends on the ability to bend. You walk through one of these keeps, your footsteps muffled on the polished floors. The air smells of cedar and smoke. Paper screens slide open with a whisper, revealing rooms of quiet beauty. In a corner, an armored figure kneels before a small shrine. The sword beside him gleams softly. The blend of faith and discipline feels universal, echoing across continents. Some experts have observed that castles across Asia, Africa, and the Americas share a common heartbeat despite their differences. Each reflects its landscape and culture, yet answers the same need for security, hierarchy, and identity. The castle, in every form, is humanity's response to vulnerability. You find yourself now in India, standing before a fortress that glows red in the sunlight. The air smells of dust, incense, and rain. Massive walls stretch for miles, their surfaces carved with geometric patterns. Inside, courtyards bloom with flowers and fountains. The mingling of defense and beauty reaches a level almost divine. At places like Rajasthan's Marangar and Agra Fort, history whispers from every stone. Builders here mastered the art of blending military precision with spiritual grandeur. The sound of temple bells drifts across the ramparts, mingling with the cry of peacocks. You can almost taste the spice in the air, sharp and sweet. A letter from a 17th century traveller describes standing in awe before these eastern fortresses, calling them palaces of thunder and prayer. The phrase captures their dual spirit perfectly, protection woven with devotion. You journey onward to Africa, where the castles of Ethiopia rise above green highlands. Their basalt walls stand dark and powerful against the clouds. The smell of rain-soaked soil fills the air. In the city of Gondar, towers and courtyards blend European, Arabian, and local influences into a design entirely their own. Here, castles became seats of empire and symbols of divine kingship. Some historians debate whether the European influence shaped these fortresses or if the similarities arose independently. The truth may lie somewhere between inspiration and coincidence. The human impulse to protect, to rise above, to endure is universal. You pause to rest in the shade of a tower wall. The wind shifts, carrying distant music. Drums, flutes, voices singing in harmony. The castle here is not a relic, but a living space, woven into daily life. Children play in its courtyards, markets spill through its gates, and the stones echo laughter rather than fear. From continent to continent, the forms vary, but the feeling remains. The castle is more than architecture. It is psychology turned to stone. Wherever it appears, it reflects the dreams and anxieties of its builders. You look up at the towers silhouetted against the setting sunday. The colours shift from gold to crimson, then to violet. It is the same light that once glowed over France, England, and Spain, now warming the walls of distant lands. The world's fortresses speak a single language, understood without words. Some modern scholars say that the castle, in all its forms, represents the human wish to make the temporary permanent. Every wall is a prayer against forgetting. That idea has crossed oceans and centuries unchanged. As night falls, you stand still, breathing the mingled scents of sand, rain, and wood smoke. The stars above are the same ones that shone over the first Motte-and-Bailey mound 1,000 years ago. The difference is only in the shape of the dream. The stars fade slowly, and you find yourself back in Europe, but the landscape feels unfamiliar. The towers that once ruled the skyline are now peaceful silhouettes surrounded by towns, farms, and quiet rivers. The castle no longer belongs to kings or soldiers. It has drifted into the realm of imagination. You sense it in every storybook, every film, every whispered tale of knights and dragons told by firelight. In the modern world, the castle has become a dream more than a dwelling. The scent of hay and smoke has been replaced by the faint sweetness of popcorn and new paper, because now its battlements live in books, paintings, and cinema. The fortress has traded stone for story. You walk through a museum gallery lined with paintings of romantic towers glowing under moonlight. Visitors move silently around you, their footsteps soft against the polished floor. A child stares at a painting of a castle rising above mist, her eyes wide. That same vision once inspired lords to build and poets to write. It lives again here, without mortar or fear. Film archives tell us that early 20th century directors used castles as symbols of both wonder and menace. Silent movies set in shadowed fortresses taught audiences to associate them with mystery. Later, fairy tale animations turned those same towers into beacons of hope. The castle learned to smile again, not as refuge or prison, but as fantasy. Curiously, historians have noted that even fictional castles borrow details from reality. The high curtain walls and narrow staircases of Dracula's fortress echo Transylvanian ruins. The graceful towers of storybook palaces borrow lines from Loire Valley Chateau. Imagination builds upon the skeleton of history, reshaping what time has left behind. You step outside and see the outline of a restored castle across a distant hill, its windows glowing warm in the evening. Tourists wander through its halls by torchlight, listening to guides recount legends that blend truth and invention. The air smells of candle wax and wet grass. Cameras flash where once swords gleamed. The castle, still standing, has learned how to perform. Some scholars suggest that the enduring power of these buildings lies in emotion rather than fact. A castle represents safety to some, adventure to others, tragedy to poets, and childhood wonder to dreamers. Few symbols have carried so many meanings for so long. An intriguing modern custom has emerged: weddings held in castles, where couples exchange vows beneath ancient arches. The scent of flowers and champagne replaces that of smoke and steel. What began as a symbol of feudal hierarchy has become a backdrop for love and equality. History, it seems, has a sense of irony. In certain places, artists have turned ruins into theatres. You can almost hear the faint hum of music echoing where soldiers once shouted commands. Light projections paint colour on ancient stone, creating illusions of stars and water. The past becomes part of the performance, a participant rather than a witness. A curious example comes from a castle in Wales, where local villagers stage plays inside its courtyard each summer. Their laughter mingles with birdsong, and the audience sits where knights once gathered before battle. It is not restoration or reenactment, it is reclamation. The people have taken their heritage and filled it with joy. You walk along a quiet street as dusk deepens. The faint outline of a castle appears behind rooftops, its shape softened by distance. Streetlights glow, and the smell of rain hangs in the air. For a moment, it feels as though the centuries are overlapping. Somewhere inside, a musician practices violin, and the melody drifts through an open window, like memory reborn. Some thinkers argue that the modern fascination with castles is a way of reconciling progress with nostalgia. The world moves forward with machines and glass towers, yet people still crave stone, silence, and stories. Castles satisfy that longing, offering a glimpse of endurance in an age obsessed with change. In fantasy novels and films, the castle stands eternal. It is the seat of kingdoms, the lair of villains, the sanctuary of heroes. Dragons perch on its towers, ghosts wander its halls, and kings are crowned in its shadow. Through fiction, the castle has achieved the immortality that history denied it. You imagine standing at the gate of such a storybook fortress. The torches flicker, the drawbridge lowers, and a warm wind carries the scent of rain and roses. For a heartbeat, you can almost believe it is real. That is the gift of imagination, to rebuild the unbuildable and to live, for a moment, inside a dream. Even scholars, those guardians of fact, cannot resist the magic. Many confess that their first love of history began with castles seen in childhood, drawn in pencil or glimpsed on holiday. Those towers still whisper to them through the years. They represent not only the past but the persistence of wonder. The night deepens now. Across the valley, lights glow where the ancient walls stand. The air is quiet, heavy with dew. You realize that the castle, once a fortress, has become a mirror for human hope. Whether rising in film, rebuilt in stone, or imagined in stories, it remains a symbol of what people fear to lose and what they long to protect. The wind rustles through the grass, carrying a faint echo of distant bells. You look up at the stars, and they shimmer above the silhouette of the towers. The castle endures, no longer a place of war, but a home for memory, imagination, and the quiet dream of safety. Morning light falls gently on the world you now know so well. A castle stands before you, tall but peaceful, its reflection shimmering on a still lake. The scent of wet grass mingles with that faint mineral smell that old stone always carries. Birds perch along the battlements, unconcerned. It is no longer a fortress or a ruin or a dream of power. It is simply part of the landscape, a reminder that time and endurance can coexist quietly. You walk across the drawbridge that no longer lifts. The chains are rusted, the wood smooth from centuries of footsteps. Inside the courtyard, the air is calm. Flowers bloom where soldiers once drilled, and sunlight warms the walls that once felt cold. A few tourists drift between towers, their laughter soft and respectful. Children point upward, tracing shapes of dragons in the clouds. Modern architects often study castles not to rebuild them, but to understand the language of permanence. Notes from design schools speak of adaptive strength, the way ancient stonework blends structure with poetry. Even glass skyscrapers, they say, borrow the idea of resilience from the fortress. The castle has become a teacher, not a ruler. An engineer once wrote that every material carries memory. Looking at these stones, you sense that truth deeply. The chisel marks remain faintly visible, the fingerprints of forgotten masons still pressed into history. These walls are alive with the ghosts of effort. They do not mourn the past, they hold it gently. Curiously, the 21st century has found new ways to love these old giants. Drones film their towers from above, lasers map their corridors, and restorers clean them with the precision of surgeons. Technology, once a threat, now serves preservation. The hum of machines joins the whisper of wind through arrow slits. The old and the new breathe together. You climb a narrow stair to the highest tower. The air grows cooler, carrying the faint smell of rain. At the top, the view unfolds in every direction. Forests, rivers, and roads stretching into the horizon. Cars glide silently along highways that follow the same paths as medieval trade routes. The past and present sit side by side like old friends. Some historians call castles the fossils of civilization. Others prefer the bones of memory. Both are true, yet standing here, the castle feels more like a living organism than a fossil. It changes with every century, its purpose shifting with the people who inherit it. From fortress to home, from ruin to symbol, it remains faithful to one role: to hold human imagination steady against the flow of time. A quiet moment settles over the tower. The wind brushes your face, cool and clean. You close your eyes and hear centuries overlapping. The clang of a hammer, the prayer of a monk, the laughter of a child, the hiss of a cannon, the hum of a drone. The castle contains them all, layered like echoes. Some thinkers now describe heritage itself as a kind of defense, not against armies but against forgetting. The walls that once kept enemies out now keep stories in. They remind us that every generation builds, falls, rebuilds, and dreams again. You descend slowly, touching the stone as you go. Each step feels both ancient and present. In the courtyard, a guide begins to speak to a group of visitors. Her voice carries gently, "These walls have seen everything: fear, love, silence, and celebration. They are us, in stone." The group listens quietly, the sound of her words blending with the coo of pigeons and the rustle of trees. Outside the gate, the sun has climbed higher. The air smells of grass and distant rain. The castle stands behind you now, calm and patient. It has outlived empires and fashions, yet it does not boast. Its beauty lies in its endurance, its ability to remain while the world changes around it. Somewhere, a bell rings from a nearby church. The sound rolls across the fields, soft and resonant. You pause, breathing deeply, feeling that slow rhythm of time that castles always teach. Everything passes, yet something always remains. As you walk away, the path feels warm under your feet. You glance back one last time. The towers glow pale against the blue sky, their reflections trembling in the lake. The air is quiet, filled only with wind and memory. The story of castles is no longer one of conquest, but of continuity. They have become part of us, patient, enduring, and endlessly reborn in stone, story, and imagination. Now the day fades. The horizon turns gold, then rose, then deep blue. The castle's windows glimmer like sleepy eyes as evening comes. You breathe slowly, letting the quiet settle around you like a blanket. The towers blur as dusk deepens. Somewhere, an owl calls. The air grows cooler, softer, until even the wind sounds like a sigh. You feel the world slowing, every heartbeat gentler than the last. Close your eyes. The story lingers like candlelight behind them, steady and warm. The castles still stand, not in battle but in memory. They wait in the dark, watching over the dreams of those who still imagine safety, beauty, and time itself held still for a moment longer. Sleep now. The walls are strong, the night is kind, and history keeps its quiet watch. The light fades to silver and the air cools. You lie back in the quiet of your imagination, hearing the faint echoes of footsteps fading into stillness. The story that began with rough earth and wooden towers has reached its rest. All the clamour, the hammering, the voices of masons and kings dissolve into soft breath and wind. You imagine the first builder lifting a stone, his hand trembling with effort and hope. You imagine the last visitor closing a gate behind her at twilight, pausing to listen to the sound of her own footsteps on the bridge. Between those two moments lies 1,000 years of human longing, for safety, for meaning, for something that will last longer than a lifetime. The world outside quiets. The castle in your mind stands steady beneath the stars. Its windows glow faintly as if remembering every story ever told within its walls. The air smells of rain and grass, familiar and calm. You breathe slowly. The noise of history fades until only the rhythm of your own breath remains. Every inhale feels like drawing in the strength of stone. Every exhale lets go of the centuries. The ground beneath you is solid, patient, eternal. In this stillness, the towers become mountains, the walls become sleep itself. You are safe, surrounded by the quiet persistence of time. The story ends, but the peace it leaves behind endures. Now, rest. The world outside can wait. The castle keeps its vigil, silent and kind. Its gates are open only to dreams. Sweet dreams,